What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Representing the Resin. My name is Jameson Wellborn, and today we're joined by Duff of Wash Hash Co. Duff, thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
James, really appreciate it, man. I'm excited to be here and get into some good convo about everything we do.
Absolutely, man. I got a chance to meet you like about a year ago, try some of your product. It was really, really nice. You could tell the care and intention that was put into it. And we had a chance to chop it up, I think, at the Secret Sesh for a bit, but really looking forward to like getting into learning more about you and your journey with this plant. So before we talk about Wash and the work you're doing today, as always, let's go back and learn a little bit about you in the early days. So where are you from and where'd you grow up?
So I'm from Toronto originally. I grew up inner city Toronto and lived there till I was about 27 and then moved out west and kind of never looked back. So I have roots in both cities. Vancouver's home now, but Toronto will always have that special spot for me.
What was childhood like, growing up? Like what neighborhood did you grow up in Toronto?
I grew up kind of on the west side of the city, like Jane and Bloor area. I grew up kind of, middle classy kind of kid, folks divorced when I was like an early teen, and the schools in Toronto are kind of mixed, right? You get some yep. kind of low income students that get bumped in with like really wealthy neighborhoods. And so you get a real interesting blend of people. But like any big city, it's easy to get into trouble. So I was, I got into all kinds of problems and was not a good student and, all that. But we'll dive into that.
Were you an athlete? Like, what were you like in high school?
My parents always had me in like team sports when I was young, but I never did well. I was always kind of average and never really enjoyed it, to be honest. I didn't like the depending on other people and them depending on me. And then I started skateboarding. And when I started skateboarding, I was like, all right, this is what I'm all about. Single pursuit, just trying to get better at something that's really, really difficult. And so I skateboarded for years. Then I got into snowboarding. And then when I was in my early 20s, I started mountain biking and I saw these guys doing bike trials. And so I learned to do mountain bike trials and I got like pretty good. I got sponsored and I was doing shows. I used to fly out to BC and do shows with some mountain bike guys out here, and and had like kind of a 3-4 year trials career.
What show did you do?
I did a show called The Flow Show. It was run by this guy Dangerous Dan, who's like a West Coast icon. And Dan, me and Dan just met through another guy that does events, and Dan was doing, I don't know if you know The Flow Show, but he describes it as like a traveling mountain bike circus. So it's just packed into a big trailer. I
grew up and my first real job was at 14 years old. And I was working as shadowing a bike mechanic at a bike shop.
Cool.
And we were totally into me and my buddy were totally into mountain biking, and we bought every drop-in season and watched them religiously.
Oh man.
Oh yeah, Jared Jesperson and all those dudes. So like that's really cool. You're into trials. Like trials is, if you don't know, trials is basically like dancing on a mountain bike. Like you're basically hopping around most of the time on one wheel with your brakes fully engaged.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like physics are being turned on their head a bit when you see people do it. It takes a really long time to learn. Like the learning curve is brutal, but once you learn it, you get really precise to the point where you actually feel safe up on all these objects and, hopping from railing to railing on your back tire and things like that. So it's a really cool sport. And, I had a lot of fun doing it for a while and then just faded out of it, man. I don't know, just kind of, work took over and jobs and other bullshit and it faded to the background. But
so before we get into that, I want to when did cannabis show up? Was it when did you become aware of cannabis? Like, was it early on in life or was it a little later on?
Man, I got a funny story about that. So my folks or my dad bought an abandoned farmhouse north of the city. and worked on it for like 5 years to get it livable. And so we'd go up there every weekend, just me and him, a lot of weekends. And he'd always be smoking these, what he would call roll your own cigarettes in the car. And I always used to tell him those ones smell way better than the other cigarettes. Like every time he'd light one, I'm like, I like the smell of that one. And what is that? Oh, it's a roll your own cigarette. And so I went through like all my younger years just thinking he was, this was some other kind of tobacco. And then when I first grabbed some decent weed, probably around 14, 15 with some homies, rolled it up. The minute it sparked, I was like, you motherfucker. I was like, all right. And it all kind of made sense. And yeah, I mean, my folks divorced when I was like 13, 14. And I had no contact with my dad for a good, like almost 10 years. He kind of fucked off and did his thing. So I was really close to my friends. My friends became that father figure. And we were just a bunch of rowdy fuckers. And hash was big in Toronto. So actually, before I smoked a joint of flower, I did BTs of hash. And I don't know how far, if you go back that far, but it's bottle tokes, like breaking holes in jars or bottles and on the end of a cigarette. And so, yeah, all through my
put a small pebble in the bottom of the jar and then spin it. And you can just get the
and you scratch it. You scratch it first at the spot you want it to break, and it'll break cleaner and not spread. Yeah, it's that's some old school tech right there. But yeah, so all through my high school years, like I was a maniac. I just smoked weed and trapped and trapped to just support the habit, just all homies and stuff. And but just like got kicked out of high school in grade 10, went to another school, got kicked out of that school. And then just said, I'm done with school and went and started working. And I worked in the trades for years and years. And, all through that, cannabis was just a big part of my life. In the beginning, it wasn't a good relationship. Like I was just getting high all the time to mask all the anxieties of being like a teenager and figuring your shit out. And it really was more of a Band-Aid to all the issues. And it wasn't helping me think through things clear-headedly now that I look back. And so it's interesting, in my sort of mid-20s, I took about a 3-year complete hiatus from cannabis and just said, I got to get my shit in order. I was doing some trials at the time, but I was like, I need a real job. And that's when I started actually getting jobs with bigger companies. And I got a job as a machine operator in a glass bottle plant. And so I ran the machine that made all the liquor bottles that you see on the shelves today, Bacardi, Crown Royal, all those kind of classic bottles. And then once I kind of had my shit in order, I was making better money. I had my own apartment and everything. Then I started revisiting cannabis and letting her back in my life slowly. And what I found at that point was it was a totally different relationship, because I was using it for beneficial reasons. It was helping me be more empathetic, more introspective, more self-aware of like my own bullshit. And it was really like this enhancer instead of this kind of Band-Aid solution for being an idiot, to be frank, so yeah. And I mean, I grew back in those days, quite a bit in the kind of like 18 to 24 years back in like the 90s and stuff. And
well, what were your first setups like? Like, let's talk about that.
Oh my God. Like, I mean, there was a D-hum. So you'd have a D-hum in there. And, but the D-hum was always like one of those, like, house ones that you have to vent and all that shit. And, and then HPS, mostly just those big HPS bulbs. And I actually had those ballasts where you could switch up metal halide and HPS, and you could kind of run, your veg with one and you're flowering with another. And then like the top tech I ever had was a rail that used to run across the room slowly with one of the bulbs, to give more coverage. So like that was like the highest tech shit at that time.
Light movers were super hot. Like in the late 90s, early 2000s, the light movers were the thing.
Yeah. And then just in like sketchy areas, like a lot of my shops were right in the middle of Toronto, like in busy residential neighborhoods and basements, getting vented out onto like, busy streets, and just the kind of setups where you feared every single day being in there,
Yeah, there was no, it was stressful 24/7. You were either there worrying or you were away from it worrying. Yeah, absolutely.
And of course it was, pro mix and some salt feeding, like real kind of basic, and no real thought about crop steering or things like that. It was a much
Was,
simpler.
was what you were growing staying in Ontario?
Yeah, always. Yeah, it was just for friends and family. I mean, they weren't big setups, kind of like 50 plant rooms at biggest, 100 plant rooms.
What were
But
you growing? What do you remember growing back then?
So I remember we had a real fire blueberry cut, and ever since I started making hash, I've been thinking, like, how come we can't find that old school kind of sour blueberry terp that hashes well? I'm sure people have them, obviously, but it's just something I'm still searching for as a hash maker. But yeah, just a super fire blueberry cut. I remember what else, like, classics like hair, but nothing too exotic though, really. I didn't have good genetic hookups back then, and I wasn't pheno hunting. I was, buying cuts from people that had shops going. So pretty basic stuff. But yeah, I had a few good runs and, made some money, and packs actually were worth something back then. So
Yeah. Now, were you cultivating flower as good as you had access to, or were you finding,
better, like the back then it was so hit and miss. You'd come across nice indoor flower, but you'd also hit like outdoor runs of things that were still pretty loud, but like you could sort of tell it wasn't indoor grown. And and it was just really hit and miss time. Like I talk about it all the time, how spoiled today's consumers are, and you see it in the way that they review products and how harsh they are on things. But back in the day, it was like, if it smoked like, triples, it was awesome. You were stoked. And so what I was growing wasn't like top of the shelf in terms of today's standards at all, but back then it was pretty beautiful.
were you like, were you drawn to flower, or was it
100%.
access, or you weren't, the hash wasn't resonating with you? Like, what was it?
No, I had like left hash behind, and I was a flower only guy, and I was a flower only guy until I would say 3 years ago. 3 years ago, I finally decided to like explore rosin again, because when I had first tried it, it was titanium nails and red hot dabs, and that might have just been the circle that I was with, but at the time. But I mean, I didn't have access to anything enjoyable. And then when I saw people using all these temp sensors and stuff, I was like, yo, this is worth exploring. And then of course, like, the first few dabs you realize how much you're missing as a flower smoker. And it's not a little. From the flavor spectrum, it's like, to me, it's like 60% is kind of goes up in smoke, and you pick up that 40, and it does give you nuance. And you can definitely, if you're a flower all the time person, you can get a good taste for these things. But it's like there's all this world that I was missing for so many years. And especially with the strains that have, fruit names or this name or that name, so a lot of times you get the flower and you're like, I don't know, I don't really get that. Like, I don't really get whatever terp they're saying it is in the name. But then you hash it, make rosin, and you're like, oh yeah, this is 100% that terp made by a plant. So yeah, to me, it was just a huge eye opener when I started getting into it. And but yeah, back in the day, flower.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, I had a similar story where, traditional hash was a part of my childhood and early days, and we'd love to fool around with it, but I never was like waking up in the morning being drawn to a BT. I was drawn to a bong or some flower. And so for me, it was always flower. But like, I think it's really interesting, like the eventual evolution. And once you realize that, it's exactly like you say, it's more than half of that flavor profile is non-changing in smoke. Like, there's a combustion flavor that is unarguable,
Yeah.
that exists, and then whatever is on top of that, whether it's good or bad, you judge. But
Well, it's to the point now where, like, when I smoke flower, because I'm dabbing rosin 99% of the time, but I do enjoy nice flower. And but every time I'm finished the joint, I go inside and I feel like almost like I've had a cigarette, that charry taste, that smoky taste in your mouth. And it's really interesting. Like, you don't notice that when you're a flower guy. You're like, oh, I have weed. I can taste weed. But then, when you're a rosin guy, you smoke flower and it tastes smoky.
No,
but not to say I don't really appreciate, like, beautifully grown flower. It's always going to have that special place with me. That's where I gain the appreciation for the beauty of the plant, and really wanted to grow it.
Have you found that with your newfound preference with fresh frozen hash rosin, your acceptability margin for what is acceptable flower to smoke has gotten, very much smaller? Like, as
I've become a complete princess.
It's like, it's got to be, every single thing has to be done perfectly for every day of that grow for me to be like, maybe I'll smoke that.
And the cut has to be something where the flavor profile translates really well. Like, Gas Gods has a frosted fruit cake and they grow it really well, and the flavor profile comes through so nicely. Pacific Bud Boys has a few cuts, Cake Mints, beautiful cut, just mouth coating, all the way down to the roach. Like, but yeah, I've become real kind of, I can't enjoy anything even. Honestly, I almost can't enjoy anything that's not organically grown these days, and isn't, like, doesn't have to be necessarily like KNF fed or anything, but like, I really do notice now, as a person who smokes less flower, the difference when something's grown to full terpene expression potential and flavor profile, and it seems to be more present on the organic side. And I'm saying that as a salt grower. It's what I have to be honest with myself at a certain point and say, yeah, like, there's something to this.
So let me ask you then, and I was going to ask you later, but does that relate simply to flower, or does that also relate to hash?
I'd say it relates in a more to flavor in particular. The impact on flower seems to be bigger for me. Like, I really do notice a major difference in flower flavor profiles. With the rosin and the hash, what I notice is maybe more depth in the flavor profile.
Yeah.
And certainly better consistencies, like better terpene to THCA ratio, so you're getting wetter end rosin. Those kind of things, and also just cleanliness of the heads. And I'll go a step further to say, like, organic sun grown, which I'm just sort of really opening my eyes to over the past couple of years. Like, it seems to be almost the ultimate in that direction of sort of fullest flavor profile expression, best overall, like, terp percentage, and just overall kind of what I describe as Gucci-ness of the end jars. And as a flower guy, like, back in the day, you'd kind of scoff at outdoor. Like, it was like, oh, it's outdoor. Like, it's going to be a little harsh and kind of, just not as nice. But not the case in these new light depth greenhouses that everyone's running that have environmental controls, and they're getting in 2-3 runs in a summer, even in Canada. It's wild.
Yeah, when done correctly, outdoor is incredible, and only true science will be able to tell, but I find it more intoxicating and longer lasting.
Interesting.
So, and I don't know whether that is because I am exposed to more indoor, more light assisted sealed greenhouse. But
yeah,
when you do have the right sun grown heads, those are some of the hardest hitting heads or rosin that I've encountered, and I find that to be true both in hash and flower.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but I mean, I don't know if you turned it on its head and you just I'm just smoking the best sun grown for a year, and then you give me indoor. I don't know if that's experiential based where your body becomes, more used to one and then the other stands out, and I don't believe that. I think truly that outdoor is really the outdoor with no material between the sun and the gland, but but then you've also got the issue of too much sun. I think cultivating for resin and cultivating for biomass, smokable biomass, are going to become like two very different schools of thought. And in cannabis school, it's going to be like, what did you major in? And it's like, I majored in resin production. And it's like, what you major in? And I majored in biomass.
Flower aesthetics, right? Like there's another one. Like for flower, it's so much aesthetics. It's 100%. So it's like one, like with those, I agree. Like I think some of the sun-grown flower can be nicer too. It's just, it's going to have a looser structure. It's hard to harden the plants off the same way and get them to tighten up the same way as you can with a really controlled indoor environment and strong indoor lights. But
you're never going to have an outdoor flower as pretty as an indoor, and that's fine. And if you're a sophisticated smoker, you're not smoking with your eyes the same way we're not dabbing with our eyes. And so,
I mean, we all know some of the craziest cuts or some of the ugliest girls you'd ever kiss. Like they're just, but that's what makes them special. And there's, like Roji Oji and, Poncho Farms posted a thing on Lindsay Oji and posted some pics, and, she's not pretty, but man, like you can just tell those special cuts. And, as somebody who's pheno hunted a fair bit, I've come across so many just really the terpiest, wildest plants I've found have often been not commercially viable because they just grow so funny. It's almost it's really hard to get.
Like I see the industry going like is that there will be the commercially viable, ultimate commercial viability crop is going or genetics are going to be created in the labs by the scientists and the teams with the well-capitalized companies utilizing the genetic work of the legacy, but really getting in there and CRISPR and all that great stuff. But what's going to happen is there's going to be these cultivars that become known as the commercially viable cultivars. And then there's going to be all these craft cultivars that cultivators are going to have to make the conscious decision to grow, being like, we know this isn't going to produce as much THC. It's not going to produce as much weight, or it's not going to produce as much loose resin, but the loose resin it does produce is going to be delicious. And we feel as though we can market that to the right pocket and make our business viable. Maybe not at the margins that these billion-dollar corporations are going to be profitable once they have, something that just produces 42% THCA that they can then, in biomass that doesn't get PM, that they just take down and can process into distillate really quickly. Like, those things where they're matching genetics to the process flow is just starting to happen, and they're just starting to realize it. But it will, once they get focused on the absolute thickest margin, we can then build businesses out of, more reasonable margins and find our places to make our money. So,
and I think the place for that is in the smaller businesses, right? Like you don't need the 1 million square foot facilities focused on really craft style strains, right? Like that's not the game they're in. They don't want to be in that game. They want to, get a fire cut and produce hundreds of kilos of it and have it be really efficient numbers wise, but, when you get into the micro world or even, the really small LPs, you can maybe create a better environment for that type of product. And you're going to have a customer base that actually follows the brand a little bit more instead of following maybe the strain that's out, so and so then you build a bit of trust in these guys to be putting stuff on the shelf that's special. And all this sort of farm to table legislation stuff, it's going to be huge for that too, I think.
I think that federal legalization in the US is going to really trigger a lot of lawmakers to change their views, breathe a sigh of relief, and understand that they don't have to be in the global spotlight breaking the for cannabis legalization in G7 nations. Like it's can't the current Canadian powers that be and people in power are not comfortable leading this charge. And it's unfortunate. Could have probably made billions of dollars, probably could have set up Canada for, the next 100 years to be a global, like Canada and Israel right there. Boom, boom, boom. No, they're just going to shit the bed. But they've shit the bed on a lot of things, and that's not this show. But
no, but it's an important point because I think the initial legalization wave in Canada was almost destined to be a bit of a fuck up, to some degree. And I think, what you have now is a lot of evidence to show that you need a better structure in place all around to get the whole industry moving and, to really get serious customers to buy into that market. And it's not that people aren't dabbling and buying stuff. It's just that, the people actually buying volume, the real consumers, the serious patients, they're not going that route, I don't think, at all. So, but
what, in your opinion, let's take a step back. How did you feel legalization was going to unfold? When you're 2016, 2017, early 2017 leading up, like what were your observations and assumptions going into this?
Well, I work in the business world in my day job. So I have a professional role where I work with financial advisors. I consult with them and I help them kind of build better portfolios. And so we analyze a lot of companies together. And, the first thought I had as somebody who knows a little bit about balance sheets and how companies operate and how capital moves is that it's like an engine. If you can put a V10 big block in a car, but if you've got a 1/2-inch exhaust pipe, you can put a giant air intake in, but that thing won't breathe properly. And it's the same with a business that's distributing a product. The distribution side is as important as the production side. And initially what I saw was all these news releases of these 1,000,000 square foot facilities and fucking this one's 18 football fields. And I just remember thinking this is so misguided. It's a product that has an expiry date. It's a perishable product, and it's a product that people need to interact with and always have been able to, right? So, taking away the ability for consumers to interact with the product was a big mistake. And also just the arrogance of these giant corporations to assume that, if we make it, they will come. That was the biggest mistake. And if you look today or even back in 2016 at what was working in the gray market, branding was already happening. There was already followings happening and people waiting for drops and all over Reddit talking about producers. And they just they were so arrogant. They just ignored all that and were like, whatever, we're just going to fucking put a brand out and sell millions of pounds of weed. And it's no, it doesn't work like that. And, but that's when you have something the whole mood in the investor scene was oh, this is going to be when alcohol prohibition ended and all these companies made all this money and shit. But I remember thinking it's a very different product. Cause if you go up to a cottage for a weekend, right, you get invited to your homie's cottage. If you're a drinker and you want to ball out a bit, you're going to go to the liquor store and spend $300-400 on booze, maybe some nice wine, a nice bottle of scotch, some beers to crush by the dock all day. It's really easy to consume a lot of alcohol, but unless you're a serious cannabis consumer, most people smoke half a joint and they're toasted. And so that same weekend in cannabis for the average user might be a $20 or $30 purchase, and there might be some left over. So how could you possibly justify these kind of spaces that you're building and the kind of amounts that they can produce initially? It was just foolish, I think.
Being in the financial world, you must have had some pretty frank conversations over morning coffees with these guys, basically with these guys being like, yo, we're taking this thing to the moon. We're cashing this.
Yeah.
And then you'd be like, well, what lights are they growing with? And they must have probably said, bro, I don't give a, the facility's never going to get built. It's a fuck, it's in the northern Northwest Territories, it's got no service. It costs $5 million to pull the power out there. We're just raising this fucking money in fucking cash. Like, that was going on so fucking much that it got normalized. That it was like, oh, that one's gone, or oh, that and at first everybody was hitting, and then it started to go to, oh, it came par for the course where some weren't hitting and some were hitting, and you were less and less opportunity came, and then it was like, oh, well, you know, they're all just crooks and criminals. And
well, it attracts easy money, right? The kind of wealth that tries to jump on those hot new ideas is not always smart money. And when you just fill some bank account with money for a corporation, put a CEO in charge, he's never find a good grower, a good master grower. Hey, he hires some guy. I mean, any hire could be good, could be bad. And then you're off to the races, and it's a clunky program. That, you know, a good example of a company that did it right, and I covered this on the investment side, was Village Farms out in Delta here. And Village was, you know, a large scale, already established cultivation facility for tomatoes, and you know, they had announced that they were going to apply for licensing to at least partly switch to cannabis. And that, it makes sense, at least in a large scale cultivation experience standpoint, right? It's sort of like, you know, if you get the right people into that facility, the facility's already got SOPs, it's already got the right equipment, it's already got investment, you know, having been made. You don't have to dump all new money into it and then try and recoup it. You know, and they seem to be relatively successful. So it was like the ones that thought it through a little bit that survived, and the ones that were goofy, and you could tell they were goofy. I mean, you just, and they're the same ones shutting down big shops and selling them off, and it's all capitulating, you know.
Do you see a realistic deregulation of the current licensing regime? Like, what I'm seeing is that facilities are being sold for pennies on the dollar, and applications are still being, you know, processed and open.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think that at some point you have to understand, you know, what is the real motivation behind the government, because the feeding, you know, you can only feed off the body if it lives, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So we almost have to show death as an industry, or imminent death, which I feel we're close to.
Or regime change, right? Or, I mean, like, Trudeau's unlikely to get in again, or I don't even know if he can go a third time. But I have a feeling the Conservatives will get in Canada. And, you know, I'd never say this 10 years ago, but I think the Conservatives would take a better pro-business approach to the whole sort of licensing side of this conundrum, and make it easier for small business, make it easier for entrepreneurs, make it less of like big corporate. It's funny, like, the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party have kind of really shifted and almost gone inversely stance-wise on certain things. You know, it was Conservatives back in the day shouting about censorship, and if you remember all the rap stuff in the States, and, you know, all those parental advisory and NWA, they wanted to ban rap music. And you know, that was conservatism at the time. And today, the push for, you know, all this kind of stuff comes from the left. It's the left that wants censorship and disinformation policies and all this bullshit. So, you know, to me, I think surprisingly, we have a better shot at a more functional structure if the Conservatives get in, which sounds bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the bottom line is that the only place the government belongs in the Canadians, in the current distribution system that Canada has laid out, is in testing.
Yeah.
And if we had government run testing across Canada using the same machines that are calibrated with the same standards by the same guy named Ralph, he flies across the country and he calibrates them monthly, then we would all be held to a standard upon which would be reasonable to be judged against. It could be incorrect. The numbers could be incorrect from the PCR machine, but they would all be incorrect at the same standard. So we would all be judged. So even if the machine read 5 high or 5 low, it's reading 5 high or 5 low for everyone. And then there's not this gamification, because unfortunately in business, the if you leave it up to the individual to do what's moral, and there are no rules or regulations against it, you're going to find a very, very large portion of individuals are not going to make their decisions based upon what's moral, but based upon what they are allowed or specifically not allowed to do. And so I think that that's something that really is important to remember.
Yeah, 100%. Well, and yeah, you get over time, I think you get real actual cannabis industry people. And what we're seeing is a big move of people from the gray side over to the legal side, especially within, hash making and rosin making and even on the cultivation side. So you're starting to get people who really understand it and love it and put the right passion into it. And I mean, that's when things change and get better.
I think every single large and medium scale operation over the next 36 months is going to need to team up with some form or factor of association to the legacy space in Canada.
Yeah.
You see every, I think 4 out of the 5 top sellers in California all, tied directly back to legacy, and it is part of their ethos.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that we're going to see this switch where initially it was, you need to shut your brand down on October 16th, 2018, because if you're operating on the 17th, you can't use that brand in the legal space. And that was just the biggest load of bullshit that anybody thought. And I mean, all the people that wished that were operating in the legacy that wanted to do right and decided to stop, and that thought this was the clear line and this was the right way to do it, all regret stopping.
Yep.
They all regret shutting down. Every single one of them wishes, looking back, that they would have doubled down and pushed harder, because that was where all the money was made.
Well, another great example of that is the dispensary scene in Vancouver that before legalization was booming. There were more dispensaries in downtown than Starbucks, was the quote that you'd hear. I don't know if you can confirm that, but they were everywhere. And a lot of them were really nicely run businesses, beautiful facilities, and connecting and distributing work by really good cultivars. And what happened during, right after legalization is the city went to them and said, okay, you guys want to now get licensed legally. First step, shut down, right? So shut down completely, apply, and then we'll consider it. But it was sort of like, unless you shut down, we're not even looking at your application.
And shutting down entails shutting down supporting families.
Oh, I mean, these were like, some of them were highly invested businesses. Like, they were nice interior. They look, some of them like Apple stores. They were like modern and beautiful. Like
Farm was like the best retail experience that Farm is like one of the best retail experience. Like the hash focused Heritage Mendocino was pretty neat with the hash making inside the retail store. But other than that, one of the best experiences, and in my early career, absolutely the best experience I've ever had, being guided through, asking questions and learning about new products and form factors. So yeah, I mean, it was really cool what they had. But I mean, they were paying some of those bud tenders $60,000, $65,000 a year.
Yeah, and these stores were cleaning up. I know a couple guys that ran them, and I mean, the numbers were really, really exceptional. But it allowed entrepreneurship. It allowed people who were getting their shit together, getting financing, putting business plans in place, signing leases. Like, all of this is really good stuff. You want people in society taking these kind of risks, getting excited about businesses, opening stores, and the customers love them. And you'd go in there and there'd be old people and a guy in a suit and then a couple fucking, serious fucking heads. And, it would just be like this cool mix of people. But it was the big scam, right? And I think, to your point, if maybe in the beginning everyone sort of dug in their heels and said, like, fuck this, we're going to keep operating our way, fuck your license, Who knows if it would have gone different, but the way that it went, like none of them basically got licensed, and all these new ones did, and who knows what political connections or favors some of these guys had that got licensed early, or I'm sure there was some fuckery.
Absolutely, there was so much fuckery, so much fucking fuckery. Like,
yeah, and
go ahead.
and then you looked at the prices initially. I mean, I remember going into one of these first legal stores just out of curiosity, kind of nice one I saw. And I go in, I say, listen, I want your best flower. Like, just give me the shit that if you had to be on a desert island, like this is the bag you'd bring. And shows me this eighth, and I'm like, all right, how much is the eighth? It was $95 plus tax, Canadian. Right, so $95, like on the tag. I was like, you guys for real? And he's like, yeah. And I bought it just because I was like, I gotta see what this is like. And it was nice, but it was just wild the way they came out of the gate with pricing through the roof, super limited distribution, and they just thought they'd have lineups out the door. And people were like, I'm calling my plug. Like,
yeah, I think you're being nice. I think it was garbage. I went out and bought some of those first, ultra premium offerings, and they were mids. They were hot, sweaty mids.
Yeah, I mean, I remember one that I got that was kind of nice, but I mean,
the medical in the early days, and Broken Coast, before they changed ownership, had like a very good stint of producing some good, and Whistler, I thought, did really well.
Yeah.
Whistler was producing probably the cleanest cannabis on the market during the medical days, but like, ownership changes, SOPs change, corners get cut, different growers get brought in, like things happen. But it was really unfortunate because the way that Canada had legalized was the opposite of any state. So any state that legalized under still federal illegality.
Yeah.
So you had to be comfortable, being in the electricity a little bit to even play, because there was a level of risk where it was like, hey, you got to be comfortable that like somebody might burst in the door with federal, enforcement on, and you're gonna have to eat that. Like you're gonna sit with that.
Which is crazy at a state level to say like, yeah, you guys can go ahead, sort of, but like also just watch your ass. It's like your parents saying you can trap a bit, just be careful.
So what it did was it only attracted, I would say for better, some would say for worse, the individuals who were comfortable with that level of risk.
Yeah.
And those individuals were more adventurous than your average Wall Street or Bay Street individual. And that was the difference, where the culture was still ingrained in the companies.
Yeah.
Canada turned the lights were off, the lights got turned on, and there was no culture that was moving forward. It was just a race to an unknown finish line of quality cannabis. Like, show me a single investment deck that says we're going to grow mids.
Yeah.
I would love it. I'd be like, this is great.
But what happens, the interesting thing with investing is like, so especially when it's a hot industry or a hot new theme, money will pour in on it. And, and a company will get funded in excess of what they wanted to raise. Like, they'll have a target for what they want to raise, and they'll be oversubscribed, right, in interest from the investment community to throw money at this idea. And, the problem with that is when you get exactly what you were looking for and maybe more, you sit there looking at all this money going, we almost have to use this, and right away, because the people who invest don't want dead money sitting around.
100%.
The first report you're going to have to go back in a quarter is like, all right, what have you done? And you're like, oh, we just built a small first facility and we're going to try that out for a bit. And but that would be the prudent thing, right? That's what you or I would do. We'd be like, all right, let's start off with like 10,000 square feet and, this many rooms, and we can always add to this side of the building, and then we can build out a lot. You know what I mean? You do it. But it was almost like they were doomed by the rate that the money came in, and the access to capital was so easy for
and
these cannabis companies in the beginning,
and it ultimately crippled the whole industry. I mean,
and it cripples everything, man. When capital's too loose in housing, when capital's too loose in any area of the market, when lending is too loose, it creates these bubbles and things blow up, and you don't get quality. That's for sure.
And every single investment banker raising money knew what they were doing as they were doing it, but they were all doing it. And so it was, if I wasn't going to raise this money and do this, somebody else was going to take these guys public or whatever it was. And I remember working for a publicly traded company that had operations in Canada and the US, and they went, how much cultivation space do you have? And I said 27,200 square feet. And that was even me, the whole building. That wasn't even like, I should have been counting my table space. And, you know, back then it was like, you know, that's fair. He said, no. How big is your property? Oh, it's 5.5 acres. Oh, well, what are the setbacks in the municipality? Oh, well, they're X.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've got this much space that you could build buildings on. And if we designed like a whole campus, you'd have roughly this much space. So we're gonna raise money based on your ability to produce that much cannabis. And then guess what? Try living in that shadow when reality smacks you in the face. You're never going to be worth what you were worth before you were doing nothing.
Yeah. So, and it's insincere money, you know, at the end of the day. It's not money that is, to your point, sincerely trying to produce the absolute best quality. And that's the one thing you find with anyone legit in this industry, either in hash making or growing or whatever, distributing, is like a passion to do it really well. Like, not just do it and not just fucking, you know, make bank, but to really execute at a high level. And that's, you know, it's the big missing piece on that side. But it's changing, I think. I think they're getting it slowly, you know.
There's growing pains. I mean, there was a lot of people who a major part of what attracted them to cannabis was the amount of work to margin that they were able to garner. And that work to margin ratio has changed. And it's probably never going to go back to what it was. And I think that there are people trying to understand, you know, how much more work is this going to take, or what new version, because growing the best weed and then letting somebody else brand it for you and not controlling your path to market is the silliest thing that you can do. Yeah. You know, somebody's gonna, if you grow good product, somebody's building brand equity off that. And if it's not you, then you better be paid well enough for you not to mind it being you.
Yeah.
And that's really what's happening is, you know, we're heading towards a amalgamation of the industry where very few companies own a number of different brands.
Yeah.
And they have, you know, their brand that caters to this target segment and this target segment and this, and they take the tops from this facility and they put it for this brand. And that is where it's going. And that's not where I want it to go. And so I think that figuring out ways that we can band together and still and enter into good deals where we don't lose control of the things we create, or if we lose control knowingly and okay because we cashed out, but not unknowingly. You know, because we can make another brand. You can make another brand.
Yeah.
But they can't make what is so special. Like, I mean, Resin Heads. Resin Heads is an example of this. Resin Heads was started by a long-time legacy maker who, you know, was deep in the medical community, was a patient himself, understood what products were wanted, went and worked in the belly of the beast in one of the, you know, worst companies in my opinion, and then left, started a brand that knew would get traction, put out product with very little product put out, got a lot of traction, and then translated that traction into leveraging it into a licensing deal to a large scale company. Like, I mean, that's that's the blueprint. Like that's what you want to go. That's what we want to push towards. Is we want to push towards, you know, your resume is your notoriety as quality and legacy, or your notoriety for X in legacy. If it's, you know, maybe it's not quality, maybe it's a affordability, you know, whatever it is, your notoriety for that thing leveraged into the legal space.
And it's a tricky one because, you know, there's hash makers in Canada that have done it and sold you know, legal brands over to the, or, you know, gray brands over to the legal side. But then the question is like, then what? So if I'm the hash maker and it's only me, and you know, they want to come and buy wash, and I say, okay, you know, they're probably going to want you to come in, and I've had these discussions with LPs and work an hourly wage to produce the hash, or, you know, hire a team and pay them less and you take a cut. But you know, at that point, and then you lose, ultimately you lose control over you know, the strains that are being run, how they're being grown, all that stuff. I mean, not for sure, but in most cases. And it's just, it, to me, it's you know, and none of them are really trying to put those brands out yet. So it's been interesting. And so I've talked to a lot of hash makers that have had offers and turned them down because it just didn't seem like there was enough benefit long term, or enough real interest to maintain the brand, grow the brand, and run it the same way kind of that it's run on the gray side. The vision seems to be different for the ones that I've seen land on the legal side. And
we're in our infancy, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
It's still being developed, and it's a game of, you know, holding till you feel it's ready to release, or it's the right time or the right opportunity with the right individual or right group. And you know, putting together the right deal and spending the money on the lawyer to make sure that it's the right deal for you, for your brand. If it's enough money and they want you to walk away, and you know that they're not going to be doing things the way you want to be doing it, and you can sleep at night knowing that that was, you know, this business was built to be sold, built to take care of my family, and I feel good about that, go for it. And you know, you can release it through the grapevine to the real community that that's happening, or you put in an ironclad agreement where you go, no, if I don't give it the final sniff and check, then they don't put my stamp on it and it goes out as XYZ.
Yeah.
You know, and it's leverage that you need, and that's building up notoriety. And I think that ultimately growers are going to do that through genetics. I mean, look at Canadian dabs. Like, Canadian dabs hunted that fruit joy and put it on the fucking map. Like, there are people in the US, there are people in California. Like, I'm down in California and people are like, tell me about the fruit joy. Like that was just one man doing his thing. And he made the decision not to release the genetic and not to share the cut, and just work it and perfect it and put it out. And so, like, I think that it's going to go back to that, where cuts are more tightly held because they're part of your brand.
100%.
They make up your brand. And so, you know, maybe everybody does need a GMO, but if you're just rocking, you know, GMO, strawberry, banana, and fucking Tangy, bro, like.
Well, and people are gonna. That's the whole thing. I had this discussion with someone, might have been Tim actually, and we were talking about, you know, just, you know, the sort of the two options you have of like hunting and going through all that pain and suffering and how much time it takes looking for unicorns, or you can buy like RS11 and, you know, whatever, Sour Dub and all these like classic or current bangers, but everyone's got them. And so almost overnight, you'll have 4 other hash makers in Canada running the same strain. And then the clientele is going to shop around, right? And in fact, every time any of you release it, you might get a bit of the business, but you're not getting all of it. But like, you know, Canada Dabs is getting every Fruit Joy business that's going out. And, you know, that's what you want to create, is that unique demand. Like, you can run GMO and, you know, you can make some money off it, but it's competitive and it's not going to fly, you know?
I mean, they're, you know, not changing the name of a cut that you get, but naming your phenotype in a pack of seeds is something that would push to every hash maker, because if you call it by the pack and then you call it the number, and then you have some competitor pop that same pack and you call it by the number and he calls it by his number, you end up in that same situation, and you both are trying to avoid it. And I think that if you have a name your pheno, but be open about what the genetic lineage is, it's a phenotype of. I like that better than having to remember that yours is the 14 and his is the 12. I don't want to. I got a lot of stuff up here. I don't want that. I want a funky name and a different kind of name.
Yeah, but you just can't get carried away with it. You got to reserve that for the ones that are real special.
Yeah. Oh no. Absolutely. Those are the ones you're building your brands on. Those are your front and center. Your bells of the ball is where you're changing your names. You're not naming anything you're not writing home to your mom about. You don't.
100%. Couldn't agree.
Yeah. No, I think the Canadian market is interesting. I think it's really kind of refreshing to kind of get your aspect of it and see where the shortfalls and the frustrations were for you. I think that it's just slowly trending in the right direction. And realistically, it's the shock to the non-cannabis regulators just needs to wear off. And that's like, a 10-year really fully washed off where, hey, this is just another thing. And we need to look at deregulating it. I mean, it's going to be a very interesting study in deregulation. I don't think I can think of a single example of another example in history where something started very, very regulated and then became very unregulated. I'm sure there is, but I can't think of one. So I think it's going to be interesting. I wanted to talk about pheno hunting, because we've touched on it a couple times. I know you have some experience doing it. Everybody does it differently. I'd love for you to kind of take me through what your technique is these days.
Yeah. So, I mean, I my technique is a bit sort of a bit belted in by the kind of room I have. Like, I built a drip feeding salt room, right? And so that's what I run. I have a table, a drain to waste table, and so it's sort of like, I pheno hunt on that, but I don't think that's the ideal way to pheno hunt. I frequently pop seeds and grow the plants out. So actually, I should take a step back. The way I used to do it was to grow out all the actual seedlings all the way out to flower, and then I would kind of judge on terpene profiles and all that kind of stuff, and look and growth rates. And then I started to realize how much different clones perform than these, seedlings and mother plants. And so then I've moved to instead like identifying females if I have to do that, then, taking those back, momming them out, and then growing out batches of each pheno. But where I was going with that is just growing technique. I've been thinking, more about pheno hunting, and I think, to me, the best way to pheno hunt is in soil, because you can better give each plant what it needs. And, on anytime you're crop steering, you'd need a sensor in every pheno. And even if you had one in every pheno, there's either plants that are going to be underwatered or plants that are going to be overwatered at any given time. And so you can't crop steer properly. And so your phenos don't necessarily express, honestly. I think they express sometimes your setup limitations. And for me, like, not being a super experienced grower, like reasonably experienced, but not like I think I'm a better hash maker than grower for sure. And I think growing's way harder than hash making. But soil, I think, from what I've seen and people that do it more than me and better than me, you want to probably be in soil and give each plant their own pot. And I think you get a way better idea of the full expression of each one.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think that being able to offer a living soil media that you can feel confident that the plants are going to get what they want, and then you set your moisture level your moisture through your soil and your
Yeah.
moisturizers with your drippers. Like I use blue mats when I've on grassroots fabric beds, and you find quickly, like, who doesn't like wet and who doesn't like dry, but you don't have to worry about the nutrient load, and that definitely takes some concern out of it, so you can look at the plant morphology and structure. But definitely a good, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, sorry to cut in, but I think also, like, when you like the damage caused to a plant's growth when you crop steer incorrectly through stretch in particular, can set the plants back to such a degree that they're really kind of screwed. The typical one is, if a plant's being overwatered on my table during that period, just because it's a slower drinker, that pheno, this pH will start dropping in that block. Nice, because it's not drying back fast enough. It's sitting in too much water. The dry back tends to be too long, sometimes 2 days for some plants, and you get pH dropping and excess nitrogen uptake. So that clawing look, that hooking, and once those leaves have darkened to the point of toxicity and getting shiny and kind of hooking down, like, they don't work through that nitrogen. They don't come back later, and they also don't get the same trichome coverage and formation and density. And so your plant, it almost looks, I've seen it happen in my room, where they almost look like they have a viroid. They look like they have HLV, but they've been choked out by nitrogen, and they run the rest of their cycle like that. And they produce some heads, but it's just, that plant really suffered. Whereas in soil, even if you get that hydration, percentage wrong in the soil for a plant, the impact isn't as great. You don't see like huge pH swings and just wild growth behavior, yellowing out, as often. So
yeah, you definitely have training wheels, as far as, like, I've never felt like more of a rock star than when I grow in living soil beds, like, especially when I get my first, like, I buy my soil from Black Swallow and ship it here, and the first runs in those beds, you're like, I am amazing. I'm amazing at this.
Yeah. Yeah. But, and then you go through flowering and you're like, oh fuck, now you're on a roller coaster.
Yeah, at the end of flower, and then you're like, I'm gonna run this soil again, and then you got a different story. Yeah. No, I think pheno hunting is super interesting. I love to talk to people about how they do it. Like, I think that you see guys who run farms running a lot of like small pots, trying to push herms out in their first cycle, and just before they want to really look through a population. And so I think that there's like a lot of good ways to do it, where you're able to be not 100% on your decisions, but 75 to 85%, where you might miss something odd that you might have had to baby a bit more, but you can look through a lot more larger populations when you're running very small pots. So it's always a trade-off. Do you want to be slow and steady, or fast and maybe not as thorough? So
and a lot of people talk about these days, but you think about how many phenos, to your earlier point, when people number their phenos, like, how many phenos have you seen under 10, right? It's always like this number 4, and I'm guilty of it too, because it might be one pack a lot of times, right? I just snagged some pack and I wasn't fully committed to that strain. Like, I don't know it. I've never grown it, so I don't necessarily want to invest in 4 packs.
Oh, for sure.
But that's the pheno hunting. You need to do the bigger hunts, I think, to really find the gems. I mean, you can get lucky in a pack, and I've had 1 or 2 kind of decent winners, but like, I have a lot of packs these days, especially if it's like kind of S1s and stuff, where you get very different offspring, and like half your phenos lean one way, half lean the other, and then there's 2 weird ones in the middle. And when you're washing, sometimes, like, I've washed a few strains where like literally half of the phenos were like sub 1%, and then the other half were like 3+.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you could determine by smell which one was going to wash and which one was.
And if you washed all those phenos together, you would be like, oh, this is not a good yield. But if
and you'd get thrown off by the terps, because whatever, like you get these kind of unique terps on the more, the kind of BHOE terps, terpenoline, and all these kind of ones that, in some of those really low yielders. And so you get kind of spoofed on what the actual taste is going to be too, because sometimes they're louder, some of those like low yielder terps,
I think it has to do with who's looking at the plants, because it's just like, I don't value a tremendous amount of individuals' opinions on cannabis who consume cannabis. There's a very, very small select few people that have, dedicated their lives, probably are makers, consuming every day, that really, I value their opinions on, if they consume something, because most people are on a journey where they, haven't tried or haven't developed a palate where they can tell, discern that incredible quality. And I think that same thing goes for pheno hunting. I think it's experience. And I think that if you hunt a pack and you need to find something in that pack, you're going to fucking find something. And it's not until you really put it through its paces and really look at, somebody else's work and your work and
so
go,
true, man.
okay.
I found phenos, I was like, this is a banger, I'm so stoked, blah blah blah. And then by the third run, I'm like, what the fuck was
this
I
isn't it.
No one even wants
this. Nothing like that. And I need something like that. And that's the same thing as where, you can give somebody something that, you would discern as your second press or mids, and they'd be like, oh, that's really good. Yeah. It's the same thing with pheno hunting. It's like, yo, this plant is amazing. It's like, yeah, because you haven't seen or grown these plants.
Yeah.
And until you do, then you'll fucking shit on this. Like you'll throw that out immediately. And so you have to, and that's just about putting your time in, and that's for anything. And so you can find something in a pack, but you just have to be accomplished enough to know, like Canadian Dab is a savage. Like he will eat through back. Hey, I'll give him packs. And they'll be like, nothing in there. And you're just like, all right, man, I know that you know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
So it's like, if there's nothing in there, there was nothing in there. And that's cool because they're scratchers. If you don't think your packs of beans are scratchers with different probabilities and most likely not correlating with what you paid for them.
Yep. That's so true. You gotta be harder and harder on your own hunting. And the other thing I think that a lot of hash makers make the mistake of, and I certainly did, just inadvertently, like subconsciously, I was focusing more on yield. I was so obsessed with like what I was getting out of these runs, and what my cost was, and what my what I needed to do to make it make sense on paper. And and over time, I've realized 100%, like you're better off having a bunch of like 2%ers that are just wild, like Fruit Joy, and those are the ones that people will care about. And it's your longevity will be better. Your the way that people react to your products will be better if you take that sacrifice on output and numbers. And that goes to what you include in your catches, and what you're putting in your rosin bags, and how many presses you're putting together, and all this kind of stuff. I mean, not to say I don't trust other hash makers, but there's fuckery, right? There's people putting out to fourth, fifth wash into this is first wash, and there's people putting 45U in because it looks clean and saying it's 70 to 149, and there's all this shit. But if you're really true and rigid with what you determine to be the quality range, and only include that and put those jars out, it shows in the work. And you may make less money, but you're gonna definitely get noticed more.
And it's who's your clientele, because the real ones can tell, but the people that are new to it, like I said, will not be able to pick up on that 45 or that new, like, what's that flavor? You know what I mean? Like it's and then, okay, well, cutting off your nose to spite your face, easy now for harder later, now, easy later.
I mean, the reality is you don't get 99% of the reviews that people might have. They don't tell you. So there could be people walking around just really bummed on what they bought from somebody, and you know, and or you could just stay true to you focusing on putting out jars you want to dab. Like, what's the cleanest I can make this oil so that the jar I have for Percy, that's the same jar that's going out to everyone, is the most pleasurable to dab on, and you get the best expression of the terps without any sort of contaminant burning tastes and funkiness, you know.
Yeah. I mean, you want your peers to be reaching out to you for trades and to get your material. Like, that's what you want. That
Yeah.
should be the goal, right?
And here's another thing that isn't talked about enough with pheno hunting, especially with hash making, is the cleanliness of how the heads detach, right? Because I have strains that are chirpy and yield okay, but the rosin is never fully clean. There's always a bit of contaminant in it, and it's because you're getting some stalks or some whatever. Something about the anatomy of the trichome and the way it's detaching is resulting, or the way that the leaf structure, leaf integrity, all those kind of things, it's getting into the rosin. There's particulate ending up in the rosin that's detectable in the banger, detectable in my lungs and mouth, and some of those I've had to actually cut out of rotation because I just can't wash them cleanly enough, no matter what I do, no matter. So I think the other part of finding those unicorns is finding the ones that, and you can see it as a hash maker if you've done it enough. You can see it on the screens if you're washing something for the first time. You get to that 90 U screen and you're like, holy fuck. Actually, not even at the 90. Usually you're on the 150 and you pull that like 180 off and you look at that 150 and you're like, oh my God. Like, and it's always like a clean look and sort of semi-transparent. Like when I spoon it and fuck around with it a bit, you can almost see the cleanliness in this like transparency that it has. And that's super unique too. And those are the ones that press the best. Those are the ones that come out the wettest. Those are the ones that blah, 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 you know.
Yeah. I mean, you know, cleanliness is incredibly important. And, you know, the color is still primary concern for a tremendous amount of consumers. So, you know, that's definitely going to have an effect. But I think that, you know, one thing that I've been talking about with some individuals, and this was brought up by MTS Farms, but, you know, we're definitely going to give homage to Frenchy Cannoli in having a one direction cycle, and then having just the suction of the inversion of the funnel that is created.
Yeah. To minimize leaf destruction and things like that. I totally agree with that.
Yeah. So I know DBS Solventless out of California runs some Ospreys, and he's done this a couple times on some material. He has had some numbers on washing a traditional rhythm, and he's noticed like minimal to negligible increases in yield, but increases in cleanliness.
I think another thing you could do too might help that process is, without changing direction, just let the machine stop occasionally, because that'll redistribute all the buds and turn them all into different sides and just reorient the entire basket, and then slowly initially but start up again to minimize any leaf damage. But the downside with that is I feel like you'd get caught against whatever mechanism is pushing the flower, and you'd have almost like a wall of flour that would build up ahead of the rotator, if that makes sense. And so I think you'd want some variance in speed at least to like help things move around a bit. But I think that makes total sense. Yeah. Every time I'm paddling, I mean, I can't believe how clean you can, how much you can paddle flower, especially certain strains, and have everything come out super clean. But I always feel as I'm paddling, like any change in motion feels a bit rough. You're like, man, I have to be ripping things apart. And I'm always like, I'm in there like almost feeling bad about what I'm doing to the flower every time I'm washing. But yeah, I mean, washing's in its infancy, right? I mean,
100%.
It's not, because it comes from hundreds of years ago, but originally. But I mean, if you think about the technology and the way that we're doing it now, 10 years from now, we're going to be looking back saying like a lot of this was dinosaur stuff. And I think we're going to find better ways to freeze dry, because no matter how much I tinker with freeze dry settings, you pull terps, you pull the alcohols, you pull certain things that you don't want with the water. And I think there's advancements on all sides of what we're doing to get an even better product out. And
Well, I
you know,
couldn't I couldn't agree more. Sorry to interrupt. Like I'm so like I absolutely resonate with what you're saying. And I think like, you know, I was just talking to Kaya and he's talking about how, you know, consistently will prefer air dried resin as melt. And it's like, well, shouldn't we find a way to do that at scale so that we can either, you know, I completely agree. I think the industry's in its infancy. We've got a lot of good minds thinking about different ways. You're seeing some really unique and maybe not successful techniques come out, but people are trying things, and I
well,
think
look
that
at Heart Tech. I mean, MTS does some great videos on it, and a bunch of years ago, it was all like 200 Fahrenheit for this long, and you cook it for 16 hours, and then shove what's left into a cart, and it's like everything's getting better. To your point,
yeah.
um,
Yeah, I think that there's a tremendous amount of like innovation that's coming. Like I think carts are another thing that we can touch on. Like I haven't seen there hasn't been any profound innovation in the vaporization cart, and you know I think something that needs to specifically come out for solventless. And I know there are models that are solventless focused, and I think there are a lot of good people starting to get into the industry. But as far as like true innovation in vape carts, we haven't seen anything for
I
quite some.
think it has to be rethought to some degree with rosin, because with any cart, I mean, part of any bad taste that you do get from any cart, BHO or even the best carts have some funkiness at some point to the taste, and your whatever element is there, whatever portion is heating up, you're not cleaning the residue off that thing or that section of the device internally, and so there's a certain amount of like already cooked oil always on that hot element, and you just build it up and burn stuff with rosin. Obviously, when we dab, we want to clean our bangers right after, like fully, and there's like Puffcos and things where you can go in with a Q-tip and clean it out, but some sort of smaller device that would allow for some wiping of the element between dispensing sort of a new dab. I think would be I have no blueprints for this idea, but I just think that's the downside, is having with rosin. There's a certain degree of contaminant, but here's another thing. Um, you know, I've been thinking about and experimenting with different microns, like really small microns, BHO style micron ranges, and pushing rosin through those finer micron ranges and then filling carts, because 25 micron is what a lot of people are pressing before carts and double bagging, so maybe you're going down to like 20 overall, but like if you think about BHO, those would be big numbers. You wouldn't want that much large contaminant in a finished BHO product. So I think there might be room to learn filtration techniques on the rosin before cart filling better, and create carts that have less of that funk taste.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Are you pushing stuff through the 5 micron?
I'm fucking around with things and making a big mess and like not having much success and not sure of myself at this point. But I've, I think there's something to it. So I'm starting to waste a bit of oil and stuff with it and figure things out.
That's awesome, man. I mean, I think that really just like the community sharing that like people like MPS Farms and stuff fosters really what's going to get us all to level up is that idea that this information is free. Go out there and find something new out and come back to us.
And one person finding something new out from MTS or somebody else or even this podcast, that might inspire them to make the next leap. So it snowballs, right? It people are feeding off these new ideas and new techs and going even deeper, and that's how you get that like ball really rolling.
100%. Before I go into more technical questions, I wanted to ask about if did you work with much cured material in the wash bin prior to washing fresh frozen, or did you pretty much start with your career with fresh frozen?
No, I started with cured material from just some small runs in like a 5 gal Bubble Magic, classic kind of watch the Bubble Man videos and bought the gear and got started. And and then once I built myself a sort of semi decent setup, that's when I got into fresh frozen and started going that route. And there are guys who seem to wash dead material and do pretty well and produce some pretty nice looking colors and consistencies. To me, though, whenever I do it, I'm sensitive to it because I'm a hash maker, but the contaminant taste is always evident in the finished rosin, no matter how loud the strain is, no matter what I do. I just can't get the cleanliness I can with fresh frozen. So that's the route, but it's a tricky route, man, because it's the harvesting is really important, the handling of the flower, the way it's trimmed, the way that it's frozen, the way that it's transported. I've worked with certain farms for 5-6 cycles, and we've run into hiccups almost every run, and a lot of times it's just the growers trying to be more efficient and save time, and they're a bit overwhelmed and they shortcut on one thing or try to change a different way of doing something, and inadvertently you end up hurting the material and losing yield, whether it's how quickly it's frozen. I mean, I had a situation recently with a farm where they typically would have 2 workers in to do the takedown, and so the flour would be going into a chest freezer at the rate that 2 people can harvest. And then for one run they decided to have let's say 4 or 5 people in, and the rate that they harvested was so much faster that the freezer filled up very quickly, and they didn't sort of think about it. So they shut the freezer, it's packed, but you've packed it in like 2 hours, and now you got to get the temperature into the center of that block of flour. Could take 2 days, and so the whole middle wilted and our yields went to like 1% on all these 3, 4, 5% strains. And it's that bad. Like the melting of material, even the slightest, really kills the yield, So it's precarious. You got to get every part of it right. The growing has to go well. The harvest has to be done with intention and with care. The transport, the hash making, the jarring, every single step. When you get a jar of Fruit Joy and it looks like it does and smells like it does, every step has been done to perfection with all kinds of thought and care. And, there's no other way, really.
I mean, talking to Kaya about the yields, some of the yields that he's claiming on some of these strains, and then you learn about his harvest process, and he's freezing on baking sheets before they go into the bag. So
yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, that's cool. Like that's probably better, but
it is. It's better. Like
but you got to really have built that capability.
100%. You got to have that infrastructure.
Yeah, I've seen it. These racks and stuff, and I've seen a lot of new tech. And I mean, I was shutting bags 2 years ago, and like I'd harvest into a bag and then zip tie it closed, and now I'm letting them freeze open so they don't frost up as much, and all kinds of little things, man. Every little bit counts.
100%.
And honestly, you're not sure about each bit, so you kind of have to try all the bits.
Yeah.
And assume that it's all contributing. Like you can never really get to the bottom of, does it really matter if I do this, or should I be more focused on this? No, you have to do everything perfectly, everything right.
Yeah. Unless you're in a lab, you've controlled every variable, or that run you've controlled the variable to make the decision. You just have to stick everything at the utmost premium.
I have a hash lab that's not anywhere near my house, and not anywhere near dry ice or real ice, and so it's like, and then the farms are somewhere else. So when I have work to do, it's like this crazy dance of, first dry ice, then real ice, then to the shop, then here, then, and it's like everything has to be perfectly planned and executed.
Yeah. Have you ever played around with any Jesus tech, like 3-day hang dry, then freeze?
Yeah, I have. Funny story. Actually, the first time it happened, a sort of friend of mine, got in touch and wanted some material washed, just sort of on a friend basis. So I said I'd do it, and he brings it over, and first of all, it just looks like complete swag, like it's mids or below, like, and it's apparently Rockstar. So I'm thrilled at this point, as you can imagine, and then I'm realizing it's kind of dry, and I'm like, so I call him and I'm like, hey man, this doesn't look great, and it's also, is it dry? Did you dry it? And he's like, oh, I had to hang it for like 2 or 3 days. But then I froze it like before it was even close to like fully dry. And so I'm like, all right, man, well, I don't know what that's going to do. I don't have good results with dried shit, but I'll try it. And so we run it, and we pulled the wettest, most Gucci Rockstar rosin that, like, if I put it in front of you, you'd never believe it came from that flower. And we got really nice yields. And so I tried it a couple other times, especially with plants that were tough yielders, like with things I couldn't get enough heads off. I would then, on a subsequent run or with some of the material, do it dry. But I really didn't feel that there was that much benefit. I've heard for certain strains like OGs and those kind of shorter stalked with big plump heads kind of strains that can really help. Like you can go from like a 2 to a 3 or 3.5 by doing a 3-day dry or whatever. But I can't confirm that personally. I haven't had any real comparative work or success with it, but I hear it's like the big hush hush thing down in the States that like half the fire, quote unquote, live rosin from some of these big brands are all Jesus teched, right, and aren't technically live rosin. But to me, I could care less as long as it's Gucci. But
yeah, me too. I'm like, that's okay. You can keep that secret from me. I'll figure it out. But
I hate the feeling of washing material that's been dried. Like there's something about the way that the paddle feels against non-live material that it's like stickier to itself. It's the paddle doesn't move as freely, and I'm a fresh frozen 100% over that Jesus tech most of the time.
So
and that's a pain for the growers, man. Like most of them want to make hash because they don't want to be hanging shit and drying it and monitoring the room.
100%. Are you washing a commercial machine or a stainless steel vessel or a brute? What do you use?
No, I'm still in a brute. I've I was on the verge of going to stainless steel, and obviously there's some sanitation benefits with stainless steel, and also just less chance of chemical passover or anything. I mean, I'm not convinced brutes are any worse for us than plastic cups we drink coffee from, but I obviously brute the stainless is better, but the cost of them seems a bit silly on a lot of them. And I looked into getting custom ones made, and I just couldn't get it. I couldn't get the setup properly done, the welding for my liking, and so I'm just staying with the brute for now. But I definitely enjoy hand washing. I used to use Bubble Magic machines, and I got to the point of running 3, 20 gals side by side, and I would put about 2 kilos of fresh frozen into each one, into work bags, and then into there, and then people were telling me, and I was convinced in the beginning I could make just as nice hash with a Bubble Magic machine as a paddle. Like I was like, this is if I take enough care and I do it right, I can make. And then finally I decided to experiment with paddling and just see like what were the results, what did I get, and right away I noticed a big difference. Yields may have dropped a little bit, but the cleanliness of the hash, especially out past wash 3, 4, was way better, and I had more control. I could feel and see and smell when the material was starting to deteriorate a little bit, and I could ease up, whereas like whatever's happening in that machine for that cycle is happening. Sometimes you open those machines, the water looks like a kale smoothie after. You're like, oh shit, might have gone a bit hard on that one. So I love paddling, and I thought I would hate it. Like the idea of going through big jobs with a paddle in the beginning seemed terrible, but then I realized like getting work bags in and out of these 20 gal machines up on a countertop was killing my shoulders, like pulling the work bags out and pulling them in and dumping all this ice in. And it And then I realized also with the, like a 45 gal brute, you can, I could run about 6 kilos total in the work bag. And I was like, you know what, I can run the same amount of material as I could run in 3 machines with a paddle. And might take me a little bit longer because the draining cycles and stuff's a little different. But um, that then I made the switch and just never looked back and tossed all the Bubble Magic machines and gave them away and paddle. And I'm really keen and interested to look at automated machines, and I think there's some really interesting options out there today. I just haven't had any experience with them personally, and I'm really apprehensive about contaminant and being able to run them soft enough but still get hash yields that are attractive. So I don't know. I need to fuck around with them. I need to get handling one, but there's a project I'm involved with that I might have some access to a machine at some point. So I'll probably get my hands on one sooner rather than later and do some testing and see. Maybe I can get some material in that I've already run by a paddle and see kind of how it does in a machine. It might be a good way to gauge it.
You should chat with Mission Hill and Professor Q and MTS about the hashtag, because they all came to Melting of the Heads with very different needs and requirements for that machine, and it was incredible to kind of watch that machine kind of tick the boxes for each of them, asking for a very different thing. So
like I love hash making for making amazing product, but I also like doing it for the flex. It's kind of fun to make like beautiful full melt things like that, and so I'm apprehensive whether I can get these kind of results with a machine. But I do think they have the capability. It's a matter of us learning to use them in the right way and get all the settings and dial them into the agitation, forces and everything to run it clean. I think it's just a dialing in process in all likelihood.
Yeah, I mean, that was a question that I had that I wanted to ask you was, what was your opinion? Do you think that, the quality level could be achieved with these commercial machines? And I think it's really, like you said, learning how to use the instrument. What do you think about, or what bags do you use?
So I use bags from Micron Extracts.
Yeah.
And they're sort of a top tier competitor to Ice Extracts and any sort of good bag maker. And so yeah, I don't know. I had some consulting that I did with Nick T early on when I was really learning the ropes. I paid for some time with him to really get my head around certain things, and he recommended them, and I liked that they were kind of a smaller company version of anything else that was on the market, and they were nice to deal with, and the bags have been just incredible. Like I still use a couple of my first bag set, and I've replaced a few of them along the way just because of physical deterioration, but it's been my fault, like scuffing them and creating little holes or things like that. But they're excellent bags.
Are you using a customized bag set, or are you running just a normal ascending bag order? Like, are you doubling up on any of your bags?
No, I've never done that. That's interesting. Never thought about doing that. No, I've never done that. No, I use sort of the standard set. I fuck around with the sizes of bags, and so I found that on my 45 gal brute, certain bags were like too tight and certain bags were too loose. And so I actually went to, I think, a 55 gal bag for a couple of the screens so that they're looser. But that's just for ease of pulling them. Yeah, what else was I going to say? Yeah, I mean, I have two sort of setups. I do one setup for rosin pulls, and I do another setup if I'm pulling full melt, which is, of course, way more screens and way more cleaning and work. But I typically like that 70 to 149 for a lot of the strains I run. Some of them, the 70, if I pull it on its own, is a little bit less Gucci than the 90 and up. So on those certain strains, I'll do a 90 to 149 instead of a 70 to 149. Yeah.
Are you determining that by sight, or are you trying smoking it?
No, by sight. First thing I'll do with any new strain or any new run is I'll put every bag in. I don't run a 25. I can't be bothered collecting 25, and some people might hate hearing that, but it goes down the drain. And so 45 and up, and I'll put every single screen in. I don't run 100. I've got a 90 and a 120. I know there are like cool like 100s or 110s, but that's what I like to do so that I can look at each individual catch and the quality. And what you'll see is that nice transparency down to the 90, but a lot of times the 70 will start looking whitish and pasty, kind of like the 45, but not as bad. And when I see that, sometimes I won't include that in the rosin catch, but then I'll make nice hash bricks out of 45 to 90U, right? That are pretty clean. Yeah, and do like temple balls and age them, and I'm starting to get into some of that cool stuff. So, yeah, I mean, even today I processed a whole bunch of sticky papaya, and I had a third wash, like a seconds quality, uh, little press out, and I just decided, fuck it, I didn't even press it. I said, fuck it, I'm not gonna press it. I'm just gonna make some temple balls out of this. So it's like pretty Gucci material, and it should just get all nice and rank after a few months. So I'm super stoked to pull those out in 3 to 6 months and see how they're smelling, because this papaya is nice.
You hot roll them?
Yeah, I mean, this stuff, man, the papaya comes out
all melted already.
Like it's like the fruit, Joy. Like, it's a pain in the ass. It's stressful as fuck. I open the freeze dryer. My cold room's at 40 Fahrenheit right now. I can't get it lower. It's maybe 40, 42. I get the tray out, and within about 10 seconds, there's no way you're getting that through a sieve. Like, it's already kind of formed into a patty. Yeah. And so I have another piece of parchment that I drop it onto, and then I just kind of fold and use the heat of my hands on the top to get it to, and it just the heat of your hands, it's all one log. And then you just, I'll roll that into a log and then cut it up and put the chunks into rosin bags instead of sieving the hash. And there's about 3 strains I run that I don't sieve at all. I don't even attempt to. I just dump the tray onto a parchment and press it into a hash log and chop it up, because it's just like there's no other way. But that's an art in itself. Like, every part of fucking with sticky, oily stuff is a bit of an art, keeping it off you and your gloves and everything else. But man, getting a chunk of really sticky raw hash into a rosin bag is it's one of those feats where, like, it's one of the hardest things I do. It's frustrating as fuck.
I wanted to ask you about fresh press versus cured. Like, what are your thoughts? In Canada, we don't see a lot of fresh press, but as a hash maker, you have access to it. So, like, what's your opinion on this?
So I'll say this, like, I the purest opinion that fresh press is the most unadulterated product, that you're preserving the terpenes and everything better than cold cure. Like, there's kind of the cold cure versus fresh press guys that battle online and kind of shit talk each other. And I get the argument for the fresh press. I think it's a better shelf life product. You can freeze it and have it, stay even longer. And the ability to have it cure out is kind of cool too. Like, you're controlling the curing. But for me, I've never been able to enjoy the experience as much as cold cure. I don't know if it's more, I don't even know what it is about fresh press from a technical standpoint. I've heard hash makers mention that it contains maybe some elements that cold cure doesn't.
Well, there's more volatiles present.
Like volatile, that's it. Yeah. So it's like, and that's what I find. There's just a slight harshness to it versus cold cure that I can't get over. And then the other thing is, I don't like fucking with it when it's still in fresh press form. Like, some people like to like chip out pieces and pull them out, and that to me is just a nightmare and a mess. And then I also think that very few rosins cure soft and wet enough for me to want to have an unwhipped jar and just scoop out of it, if that makes sense. Like, most strains, even if they'll cure up kind of wet, when you do a jar of fresh press, they'll be pretty damn dry and crumbly in the fresh press form, because there just wasn't enough and you can't whip it. But the really Gucci ones that wet up nice, you do fresh press, and then you go to scoop in once it's cured and it's soft. It's like butter. Man, like that's kind of special. But generally speaking, I find
those are rare.
the
Those are
rare. And I don't love doing it. Obviously, as a hash maker, jarring it is a pain in the ass, and getting it to come out clear with no bubbles is an art that I haven't even come close to mastering. Like there's guys in the States I see running fresh press that literally looks like glass. And that's obviously something I'm aspiring to get to one day, or get the cuts and learn the tech well enough. I mean, I kind of know it, but I haven't got it down. But then it's also like every strain runs different in fresh press. There's some that almost seem to like want fresh press. They come out so clear, everything looks so Gucci. And there's others that just come out completely bubbly and weird and foamy looking, and you're just like, why would I put this in a jar like this? Is not attractive, you know.
100%.
But I am super impressed with the guys that can get it that clear, and get it into a jar that clear, at the right weights. Professor Sift is one that I follow, and I'm always blown away whenever he does a fresh press run. I'm like, this guy's a wizard, man.
Yeah. So a lot of these guys that, the way that they're able to do it is incredible. And I think you actually have to hunt for fresh press, or you luck out. But like, I think lucking out is like, it's like lucking out would be like scratching a lottery ticket and then winning. And then on the back, there was like an additional lottery that you scratched and won.
Yeah.
It wouldn't line up like that. So I think that, I think that's something.
There's not enough demand for it too. I find if I put it out, the plugs don't want to handle it cold, and then you get it all curing before people get it. And I think the consumers caught on to
geography. Is it because
if you're shipping across Canada and stuff,
it's the reason that fresh press isn't big in Canada is geography. I think that's the only reason, because.
Yeah, but the other thing I think too is that I think there's been some, again, fuckery on the part of hash makers to just use strains that don't wet up and come out crumbly, and just doing only fresh press with them. And sometimes those are great. Like Concentrated X has a straw nana, and my homie Humble Gardens has the same straw nana from DNA Genetics back in the day, Amsterdam based, and they that cut is just super high THC, low terps. Like Tim's run it in his program. The terp is small. It's just like pure crystals. It's wild. But it makes this crystal clear fresh press. It's beautiful, and it's really nice to dab. And the Concentrated X's cut is just like super special. It's all floral and just really nice. So there are those ones that is the right format for it, and but yeah, I mean, I think there's room for that market to grow in Canada as well. And I think Full Melt's on the same page. Like, it's a shipping problem. And there's guys who are tried shipping with dry ice, do ship with dry ice, ship with cold packs and all this stuff. And, like Van Span in Canada is probably the top dog, in my opinion, on the melt side. And just, but you do have to almost assume that most clients are going to get it melted, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's too hard to maintain it in powder form. Yeah. But man, when you can have farm to table sales, or you can have dispensaries that are properly getting their shipments in frozen and kept in freezers, and you just walk into a dispensary and you get a nice cold thing. Maybe you even get it in a cold pack in a little U-line box if you want to pay a bit extra.
That's the 710 model. I mean, they send you home with an ice pack, man. Like,
man. Yeah. I mean, there's no reason we shouldn't be doing that. And, Sunrise and some of the shops are trying, but they're limited by how it comes to them. And it's like sometimes the product's not getting respected on the way to the dispensary, so.
No, I think that's the biggest problem in Canada right now is the logistics, the supply chain, and the path to market. Like the opportunity that every state had with their regulatory regime in the life cycle that they had, no matter where they ended up, was a very easy path to market for makers to produce a vast array of products, bring those products to a sanctioned like legal dispensary, and then vend those products to a point where you're attracting a tremendous amount of new consumers because you have so many different form factors that you're offering up. Whereas Canada, we stifled all that interest because all that interest peaked, and then we limited the amount of products for the first 2 years, and then we grew it a little bit and opened up more products. And I just think that not allowing that sort of farmers market creative offering mentality where realistically, nobody was badly, hurt in any kind of way in all these examples, is probably what crippled, really the interest in the Canadian retail cannabis store. I mean, I know all these great retailers are doing their absolute best, but I mean, in the early days, it was the most sterile environment. I mean, there were a lot more interesting stores selling a lot less interesting items.
Oh, it gets worse than that. I mean, I've heard that the BC cannabis stores are ultimately sort of the licensee of the independents in a sense, and is how I understand it. And I could be wrong. There's probably someone screaming right now, but the thing is that they have the data apparently on which stores are doing the best, and then they'll use that data to open up competing stores nearby, but they also get wholesaled at a lower cost than they're selling to the independent, so they'll retail at a price below where the independent can on the same product that they've just, like mobsters, gone in and sold you at a higher price and move in next door and say too bad, and it's a rigged game, man, like a lot of things. And I mean, I work in the business world, and it's gross. It's a gross space, and my goal is to transition out of that over time and into this, but it's very hard to figure out a path today that is lucrative enough, and it's, I think that opportunity is growing on the legal side, but for a while I just haven't had any confidence in the ability to build a career with longevity and some job security in that space.
You got it. I mean, everyone needs to continue to build their brand in wherever they are. They should spend a little bit of time every day building whatever personal or corporate brand is around them, because what legal cannabis in Canada said would be of no value is going to be of the most value, which is brand and recognition and reputation as quality. So I think that, you're doing the right things. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people over the years where they go, listen, I'm like, and not even from the financial world, from the just pure legacy world, where it's like, yo, I need this much to sniff over there, and it's like, bro, you're not going to get half of that.
No, I know.
And they're
when
like,
I first started talking to LPs, I had dreams of like what I wanted to earn. I was like, coming in, I'll make cash for you, and blah blah blah. And then I was, very quickly like humbled by, okay, this is not gonna be what I thought it was. So what are some angles? And that's when you have to get creative. And the other thing is, like, I have kids. I got two little kids, and for me, I my parents taught me to go to school and get a job with a company, like. And it was kind of foolish to be an entrepreneur. Like, you can fail and lose everything and so much risk and blah, blah, blah. But I think today it's the opposite. And it's a lot of times it's not one business, one pursuit, one job. It's like having a couple irons in a couple different fires, or fishing lines in a few different ponds. And, you never know, like, when something's going to hit, And, it's so yeah, I think I'm going to continue to explore it. I'm going to continue to have fun making incredible oil on the gray side. And, for me, it all came about because of COVID. Like, I had my job, it was downtown, Monday to Friday. And it's, I don't have an office job. I pop around and meet with people, and kind of like you, I'm doing a lot of lunches and networking and building relationships and fucking around. And then all of a sudden I'm at home all the time, and I had a little sort of tent shop going in my garage, but I'm like, maybe this will be a good time to like take this a bit more seriously. So I just dropped, 30K into like a proper shop. And then decided, fuck it, I'm gonna learn to make hash too, and I'm gonna start a hash brand and a rosin brand. And then I had so much fun in the beginning, just building the brand and doing labels. And like in the investment industry, I help people make lots of money and lots of money for their clients, but you don't get a lot of praise. You don't get a lot of thanks. It's not a very communal place, and everyone's got egos and they're kind of shitty, and it's like a kind of dark world. There's great people too, obviously,
Yeah.
but the bias towards shittiness is high.
Yeah.
And then I start doing this. I launch Wash, and I start putting jars out and getting things out across the country, and then seeing the people post it in stories and get hyped on it. And then I start getting all this praise from people like, yo, really nice work, love this, or it helps me with this. And I just realized, like, wow, like one job is very lucrative financially, but gives my soul very little. And this thing is not very lucrative. In fact, a lot of times I have no idea if I'm making anything. I'm probably losing money, but I'm having a hell of a time doing it. And I'm getting all this positive feedback and community, building community and meeting all these nice people and cool people. And it's like, it's been the coolest journey for me. And, it's for me, like I'm just in my early 40s. And it's probably going to be one of those like TSN turning points where like everything changes probably from this point forward slowly. Right. But that's the path now. The path is back to what I grew up loving and doing. And, I did this other thing for a while, and it enabled me to build a house and start a family and get financially stable. But now I have to follow what my real dream is, which is to work with this plant and bring it out to people and create amazing products in beautiful little jars,
100%, man. And I mean, you are what you're around. And like, I worked in commercial real estate for the better part of 6 years, and stepping away and, finding my way into the community, as like somebody who's put their face and name out there, was like the best thing I ever did. I mean, that corporate world promotes, money and financial gain over anything, and will celebrate, taking advantage of another. And I think our community, the true core cannabis community, regulates and watches how we all operate, and then time will eventually catch up to you. You will eventually not get that invite to that certain dinner or that certain event. And we are a family, and we all take care of each other and watch out for each other. So I think that, the best, it was definitely a TSN turning point in my life. That's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And then it's cool when you can kind of see that happening, and you don't really know where it's going. Like, I don't really know. I don't know how far this is going to go, but I know I'm having a blast. I know it's opened up a lot of new doors. I've learned new skills that's one of the most satisfying things in life, is getting good at something, to the point where you're proud of your own work, and then another big soul feeder is making people happy, man. Like seeing this shit go out and seeing people get stoked. There's nothing like it, I mean, that drives me more than absolutely anything.
100%. It's so cool to see somebody take something that you've cultivated and put all that hard work in, and then when they exhale the resin, the vapor, and then their eyes light up, and then they look at you, and you're just like, oh wow, that was super genuine. You're like, oh wow, that was really cool. Like I definitely know a little bit about that feeling. I wanted to ask you if you put much thought into yields. Like you come from the finance world. We are using these yields in such a non-scientific way in our industry, and there are so many variables that exist within a yield, whether it be the spectrum of micron to the water activity of the plant prior to harvest, to a multitude of other variables. Have you put much thought into this? and how we can make it better? Or is it something that you don't pay much attention to?
No, I mean, I think about it a lot because a lot of the work I do is sort of contract work with other growers where I'm washing their material and I'm having to report back yields, and we're having to do financials based on that and account for everything and, do invoicing. And so, the traditional way obviously is like hash yields, right? Like how much fresh frozen went in, how much hash weight did I get out of the freeze dryer? For sure there's an argument that that's almost completely irrelevant, I think, but it's relevant if you want to assess the ratio of pressed rosin to hash, right? So initially, if you're trying to assess, like, do these heads press out to a high percentage of rosin, that hash number is important. But when I do subsequent work with the same growers on the same strain, we're focused more on finished grams of rosin and rosin grade catch, like not including the food grade, not including the high and the low, just the middle catch. Is really the only thing that's relevant. The problem with it is it's always way fucking lower than you want to hear and see, right? Like the world of 6%, 7%, 8% doesn't really exist when you're talking about how much rosin you make at all. These are comical numbers, right? And to me, honestly, man, I've watched a lot of shit, and I mean, people might tell me I just haven't seen those cuts and blah blah blah. But I see people with 7% strains and 8% strains, and I'm like, I don't fully buy it. And what I think is happening is they're harvesting dry plants. I think they're drying back to the point where the plant weight is lower, and you're getting a yield in excess of 6%. I found I've run some GMO at about 6.5. Not dried out, like kind of still healthy at harvest, not about to go limp. But I've also seen GMO do almost 9% when we dried the shit out of it, and it was almost wanting to fall over, and then we froze it and washed it, and it was 9%. So I could go out there and say I got 9% off GMO, but that's not really the case, right? And those subtle differences in how that plant was drinking right before harvest is going to make a massive difference on your yield. And to me, it's going to affect more than like how efficiently you washed it, for, let's say, as another variable. You know what I mean? So to me, it's like, to me, it's like, how much material did we freeze total in this run? And then how many grams of rosin did we get out of finished rosin? Is like,
it's rosin per square foot.
Yeah. And even rosin per light. That's one thing I've suggested in the past is rosin per lamp, right?
Yeah. No,
a lot of these old school growers go by light. Like, oh, how many lights of this? How many lights of that, right? It's like, what does that mean? How many fucking plants is that? I don't know what your setup's like. So
yeah, as long as you determine if it's 4x4 or 5x5, you can kind of track with
totally. It. Yeah, totally. So, to me, that's more relevant. And so, I don't know, man. I saw a post this summer. Someone was bitching about prices of rosin, I think they were bitching about prices of sun-grown. Like, how are these guys charging more for sun-grown and this and that? And I think they even went to suggest that, like, if something yields higher, the price per gram should be lower to the consumer or something like that. But I mean, that's just, I don't think people realize who haven't made rosin how little of the full catch goes into those jars that you wrap. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, we could go through it quickly. Like, if I get 4% off something, probably only half of that is first and second wash, and a little bit less than that is going to be my middle catch. And then I'm going to lose 10 or 20% pressing it out. If I'm lucky. If it's a bad presser, I might lose 30, 40% pressing it out. So, what you end up with is like 1 to 2% on good runs, but that's something that's now valuable. That's Gucci oil. That's you could enter in a comp, right? Or you could, yeah.
I was chatting with Professor Sif the other day, and he was like, I don't tell people if it's, ins or outs or depths. Like, if it's Gucci grade, it's Gucci grade. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, yeah. He's like, I don't want people taking a preconceived notion that they have about sun-grown and holding it against my resin. If I've judged this to be quality resin to go out under my brand, you know it's primo quality, and so
yeah, that's cool. I mean, I it's interesting because this year I kind of advertised some runs as sun grown, and so did some other producers in Canada, because I think there is a bit of a awakening to the fact among the serious heads that, like, no, we need to pay attention to this, and this might be different and better.
And Mission Hill feels the same way. Like they have their own sun grown sticker that they'll put on their jars that are sun grown to, like, draw attention to that. So,
but that's cool what he's doing. Like, I like that idea too, right? I think I'll probably get to that point where I'm like, this is nice oil. Like, it's like, but I'm also gonna. I think the other thing that I'm planning to do is tier my drops all the time, and sort of have like a premium tier and a still good tier.
like second grade tier. Like,
but not second grade. I mean, like a good grade and then like a special grade. You know what I mean? Like, okay. And maybe even do like box runs where they're in like, some cool printed boxes or something. But I think for my brand in particular, I definitely want to, there's 3 or 4 cuts and runs that we do that people just go nuts for. And the oil's so nice. And those ones I want to maybe do something special for. But
you have to create, if you think something special, you have to treat it as special if you expect others to treat it as special.
Yeah.
For it to just go out into the world and come back as special, like that's in a league of its own. But I think that, doing stuff like that, like that's what we're seeing in the Cali market, like, box sets with the same cross, or, pheno hunt runs, or the best of the best in a primo pack or whatever. Like, I think that stuff like that is really cool and draws attention. But I think like what are you doing with your second press and with your second grade stuff? Like, are you creating secondary products? Are you just not paying attention to that and then moving it on to somebody else? Like,
I've been fucking around with different things. I've been putting some of it out to market as like a B grade. But like obviously up front and labeled that way.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I've been doing, I played with carting some of that oil, like trying to do my 3rd, 4th washes into carts, but I was finding it's just not clean enough. Like, you actually want to use your best oil for carts, with my experience, which is, it's hard to do, but that does work the best, obviously. But I've been putting that into the capsules that I run. So I've been doing my 3rd, 4th washes. I've been doing big runs of these rosin caps. I got the idea from Vanspan, but I use that edibles medicinally personally, and I don't always like eating a gummy or a cookie or something. Sometimes I just want to like take a med, like pop an actual cap. So I've been making those, but you don't want to put like really food grade-y stuff in that's like greenish or anything, right? Like, so to me, if I'm going to eat it, I want it still in that nice clean range. So I've been doing some of that. It's not really financially efficient, but I'm pretty adamant about staying honest with what goes into my jars and staying in that nice catch. And I think I really believe, I've had good response to product because of, in part because of that, in part because of holding true to being honest about what's going in, what the catch is, and how it's been pressed out, and taking a bit of a hit on overall production, right? Like, you're putting less out to market in that way, but it's to me, because it's not really, I'm not dependent on the income from it. It's not an earning mechanism much for me. It's a passion project. It's something I do for the love of it. And as I say that, I'm like, I can't believe I fucking work that hard for just fun. But I'm trying to build something bigger over time.
Absolutely.
I'm trying to build something that I can take to the legal side and potentially one day, and do something wider with. But yeah, I mean, it's a labor of love, and you got to kind of make sure that if you're a craft brewer, the batches you're putting out are always your best work. You can't be fucking around with seconds quality getting mixed in to just try to move more jars. Which is it's so easy to get caught up in that as a hash maker because it's hard, and you're the market's softened and there's hash makers out there now running so much material that they're putting things at such a low wholesale cost that people are coming back to existing hash makers and saying, yeah, but I can get this now cheaper. And but it's out of necessity. A lot of people get mad at it and it's like, fuck, why are people dropping prices? But to me, it's like, I get it. But it's a demonstration to the distributor or the end client that they have more material than they need, right? If you're producing only enough for your needs or you're oversubscribed, then you're never going to have that problem, and people are never going to have a problem maintaining the price point with you.
Yeah, I think that upfront pain is going to be worth a lot in the future, and making those decisions based on quality and gaining that reputation now is going to be so valuable if you're able to leverage that and understand when to leverage that in the future. And I think that time is coming. So, I commend you for doing that. And I've definitely, been able to try a few of your cuts. I know I tried the Sugar Shack, which was very impressive. And then the First Class Funk, which was,
yeah. Sugar Shack's the one I mentioned that I thought was awesome initially and then have subsequently decided is not that hot, but it's a nice cut and it yields well, but it's just not special enough to keep around. So I let her go. But that First Class Funk, hopefully I'll be able to do another run soon of that. And that's just spectacular material grown by Pacific Bud Boys. And they do such a good job of organic living soil with teas, and you can tell when people do it right when it doesn't look like a tea room or an organic room. It looks like a salt room. Like when he's filming videos in there, these spears and hammers on these plants, you're like, this can't be a living soil facility. And it's when people have their soil dialed in and they're doing testing and they're but that cut too is just gassy funk, and it's beautiful because it doesn't lean too heavy on the GMO side. GMO tends to dominate. It's got all that creaminess. So yeah, it's a fun one.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. I wanted to talk about resin mixing. Is that something that you're a proponent of? We're seeing a lot of it going on these days.
So in what sense? Like, can you describe
we can break it down. We can either say mixing material in the wash, mixing loose resin, or mixing rosin. Is that something that you'd like to do in any of those optionalities, or none, or what are your thoughts?
I've done the first and the last. I've mixed material in the well washing, and I've mixed rosins post. I guess you could mix hash too and then press it together.
Yeah.
Was that the middle option?
Yeah, that was the 3 ways you could do it.
Yeah, on the middle way, but yeah, I think it's cool. I think it might be kind of the future in some ways. I've seen the guys in the States doing a little bit of it, and it's kind of mixology in a way.
For sure.
I do have cuts that I really like certain things about the terp profile, but it's also missing something, and to be able to layer in something that adds to it. I've never personally created a mix that I was like super proud of and almost wanted to name and put out. So I fucked around with it. I find a lot of times one of the terp profiles really dominates, and so it's really a question of the ratio. Like if you put something at 50-50, it tastes all one way still. Yeah. So maybe one's so loud that you got to dial down that one to like 20%. But I have no problem with it. And I actually don't think there's any difference in those 3 methods to the end result. I mean, a lot of people will advertise like this was washed together. And it's like, who the fuck cares, man? Give me a rosin jar and I'll whip it up. And those are those 2 oils together, Yeah.
I mean, some people think it's a lot different and some people don't.
Yeah, I'd be hard pressed to think otherwise, but who knows, man? But yeah, I think it's super cool. I think if it's done well and you create something that's that's actually noteworthy, then cool. Why the fuck not? I don't take anyone away from that.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think that you're going to see a lot more of it. I think that, you see a lot of blending in the alcohol industry. You're going to have an outdoor, non-offensive, but non-notable base, uh, hash rosin combined with some unique indoor, really terpy varietals that are less, lower yielding, and creating these different flavor
I,
optionalities. And then
I tried it. I'd put this apple sundae haze, I think it is, that Tim had cut from Tim, and it was like a 0.2% or something. Like you get like 10 grams off a few kilos of rosin. And, but I washed that one. I did like a 50-50 wash with something that yielded well but had low terps. And it did kind of work to get some of the terps in. But the problem with that, and I think you and I have talked about it, is a lot of those low yielders, where you don't get easy separation, like the ones that are really low yields, they also are dirtier hash. Like you can't get nice clean heads, and they're all in the really small ranges, and all the stalks come off too. So it's just this like muddy mush, you know. And so when you do that, you're kind of, yeah, you might pick up some terp profiles that are interesting, but you're also probably introducing dirtiness into the finished rosin that wasn't necessary.
yeah.
So you got to weigh the two things, you know.
Yeah, I think that it's going to be really interesting, because I think that there's going to be some purist schools of thought. I think there's going to be some groups who try and leverage a higher price point in the future for single strain versus all these blends that we're starting to see, and it's just going to be really interesting to see where that market goes, because you've got different people pushing different things for different prerogatives, like because they value different things, the almighty dollar, and where can we get this outdoor booth, turn it into an unpalatable rosin, and then add something that then create a palatable offering. Like, I think that that's going to be a commonality that's going to become all too common.
I mean, you got to know who you're dealing with, I think, and you've got some single source people in Canada, like Pineapple Reserve, who are doing amazing work, and KNF feeding and everything done in house, and with those type of people who are giving it their all, you can see that you're going to get a product that's worth as much, if not maybe a slight premium over their indoor runs,
Yeah.
if doing it right. And but you also have to see when your plug gives you a call and says, hey, this guy's trying to sell me ounces of live rosin for $400. Like, my first response is always, I guarantee that's someone's shitty, gross, real outdoor run, like not in a greenhouse, like in a field with dust and shit all over it, right? So yeah, I don't know. It's it's good. Again, it just comes down to being discerning as a customer, right? And really trusting certain people that you work with and support, And I'm like that, as I do like to buy oil from other hash makers, but really just, the ones and the stuff that I'm most keen on and or haven't tried. I like buying new gear that comes to market that looks sexy. I want to give it a go.
Who are 3 to 5 of the standouts in the last 6 to 12 months for you, as far as flower or hash? Shout outs for makers that that you've been able to try some of their work.
Well, I would say on the hash side, like some of my favorites, and if I leave anyone out, I don't mean to be rude in any way, but some of the people, I enjoy their work, and through getting to know them, I think they make hash with the same kind of intent that I do, to prioritize cleanliness and all this shit. Vanspan, Canadian Dabs, I'd had no experience with him, and actually he had not a lot of presence. He's not super active online, and he just didn't hit my radar. And then I met you and so opened that jar of fruit joy, and I'm like, whoa, okay, I need to be in touch with this dude, and chatted with him and got to know him, and Yeah, concentrated X. I mean, they're sleepy. They don't do a lot of stuff, but it's super cool because when they do, everyone's hyped and it's always fire and it's single source, organic, everything. And they've been apparently doing it forever. I mean, I'm pretty new to even smoking, to dabbing rosin, um, let alone making rosin. So I think these guys are real OGs. I think I mentioned Vanspan, Pineapple Reserve, obviously.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, there's so many, man. Juice Box Selections doing some good work. I mean, it's just, there's a lot, you know. But there's a lot of weird stuff going on too. There's a lot of kind of quiet white labeling where you don't really know what's being white labeled and what isn't, and who's running what gear, and I'm not trying to be a purist. Like that doesn't necessarily matter in the absence of it only matters in the absence of quality, right? Like
Mhm.
if quality's there, then who the fuck cares who pressed it? Or I just like people to be honest.
Yeah.
I like as somebody who buys rosin to just tell me what this is. Like, is it what's the
Yeah.
chain of command on this one? you know.
Yeah. So, as somebody who works on the financial side of things, has a really interesting insight on the unfolding of Canadian legalization, because not a lot of people are able to, have the insight you have on the corporate side, as well as like a deep connection to resin. It's very unique. You
Mm-hmm.
know, what do you see happening over the next 3 years? What do you see taking place in Canada?
Well, I mean, I do think we've pretty close to bottomed in terms of just you know pack prices for mids going down to like $200 or $100 or whatever crazy story you've heard from someone. um, but it's weeded out all these kind of people, again, to our earlier comments, like not really giving it their all, just trying to pump out dough. And when your intent is to make money, and that's your focus, you're you're never gonna be happy with what you're producing, I don't think. But so it's kind of like the cream's risen to the top over the last while. I think a little bit too. You're starting to see, and the good producers haven't dropped their prices. The people who I know that have invest a lot in what they're doing and equipment and innovation and new nutrients or whatever, or new hash equipment, whatever. Those guys maintain their prices and should, and then new people are getting in too. I'm seeing like shops turn over where some guy's quitting, but someone else is saying, I'll step in and give this a go. But those are more experienced people I'm seeing typically, because if you got to have some balls at this point to go in and put some money into a grow and get everything going. Like the margin for error is reduced significantly. Like anytime your profit goes down, your profit margins, slimmer, it means you have a very small margin of error for runs, especially if you have a big shop that costs you 30 grand a month in overhead. So I think, the ticket today is like small. It's small. It's like small, controllable, and then scale only when demand is persistently above what you can do. And then ratchet up slowly. But like this is not a time to ball out and take big risk, and it's a good time to shut down rooms and think differently about how you're doing things. And yeah, man, I think it's but I think looking out like 3 to 5 years, I think this trend persists where the cream rises to the top, and there is a significant portion of the heady people who are looking for quality above all else, an amazing experience, and they'll pay a good premium for the top brands. Like, and you look in the States at Trilogy and, West Coast Collective and all these brands, like, uh, you know, there's no one has any issue paying for those jars. Like I see people in Canada posting those jars all the time, and I know what they're paying for them, and it's belligerent in Canadian dollars to me, because I make cash, and it's just, but it's because those are the guys with the best cuts, the best variety of cuts, and you know, reasonably good processing and everything else, and cool labels, and you know, good branding, good sort of visual appeal. You know,
Yeah, they've built their name on quality. You know, if you're going to open that jar, you're going to have a good experience, and the level of experience is going to be nuanced based on that strain. But you know, it's not going to fall below a threshold. Like, you know, that's what 710 Labs has done so well, and you know, a number of these other groups. I mean, we're talking legacy and legal, but you know, 710 Labs maintains a level of consistency the same way I think Trilogy and those others do, not to the same level, but definitely to time after time repeatability. And I think that's really important, you know, when you're building a brand. So
yeah, and it's yeah, it's saying no to dropping stuff. I mean, we touched on it earlier, but I was talking to Vanspan recently, chilling out and having dabs, and just talking about how much material we run, and that's the deal I do with growers. Like, we'll produce it, but like if it doesn't come out where I'm comfortable with it, it's not going to go out under this brand, and that's hard for people when it happens, you know. But when you're doing single source and you've got your own farms, you have to do the same thing. You have to say no sometimes to your own gear and be like, that's just not fucking good enough. Like, I could stuff this into jars and pretty it up with a lot of tapping of this tool, and I could put a super fancy label on it and hype it up in videos. But when people get it, I know in my heart they're not going to go nuts. So I'm not going to put it out. That's hard to do, right? When you're putting all this money into runs and everyone's fucking financially stressed right now. Like, it's a tough year, you know. Most people are making less money, and most people have higher expenses. So it's like that's a, you know, that's a tough period. And so that's when you get more tempted to be a little looser with things. But yeah, so I try to think about that stuff a lot.
I think that's hard. I think, you know, a lot of people are making that mistake, and you know, maybe pushing that envelope, and it gets noted in consumership, and whether that translates to a, you know, a devaluation in the brand in the future or not, we'll see. Like, you know,
Yeah.
I think that there's going to be a big calling all cars for legacy brands to team up with legal operations over the next 3 years, and I'm definitely excited to support that, because
And I think the key to those things are going to be a willingness and an understanding on the part of the LPs to the value of these brands and continuing the same feel that these and it sucks because unfortunately from a packaging perspective you can't give it the same feel as gray, right? It's got to be in some kind of goofy packaging above and beyond your nice Myron with a wrap on it. I'm not even sure you can wrap a Myron um, with full designs. I think that would be impossible. You know, I mean, it's just, so it's tough. That's why I'm not there yet. And I think maybe things change in that respect. And that's a big, I mean, there could be little things that change in the regulations around packaging, around any of this stuff that could totally change the landscape and all of a sudden attract all the gray market clientele. But as it stands right now, I don't know. I think I'd be more interested to watch some of the things iron themselves out in time, and then kind of tiptoe in when things seem a bit more sure. But that's also a selfish thing to say, because without people doing it right now and taking the risk, we won't make progress. So you got to respect the guys in it today, even if they're not making it. Let's say they're not killing it, and you know, people post a shitty video about the jar of rosin they bought from the legal shop. Like, at least they're doing it. At least they're there. We need those guys, right?
100%.
Because they're paving the way. But selfishly, I want to sit on the sidelines and wait for a good time to get on the ice when everyone else is tired.
I think 95% of the brands that are around today aren't going to be around in a year or two.
100%. Yeah, I totally agree.
Scratched and revamped and redone and reworked, because people are, you know, people who aren't about this life, they're like still trying to figure out like, okay, well, like, who do we like? I don't care who you want to be as a company. You are the quality level that you can produce to a true consumer. If you're trying to create a consumer out of a new consumer, then that's your own thing. And like, if you can trick somebody into, you know, a really low level offering at a really high incentive, like that's cool. That's not what we're here to talk about. But to a real consumer, you know, quality is going to speak. And then there's a whole nother group that is what the weed looks like and what the bag looks like. And we can't have that in Canada yet. So that consumership is completely legacy because we're not identifying or satisfying the status symbol that is a bag of weed. Like a bag of weed has always been a status symbol. And before we had Mylars, it was just what the weed looked like. Like, I don't like purple weed.
Yeah.
Because I've been using cannabis for medicine for years, and I don't find purple weed to be as strong as green weed. But purple weed was like a mylar. It was like, look how different this is. It picks up the light, you know, the crystals.
We can all remember the first time we saw like actual fully purple.
Real purple weed. You broke it open. It was all purple. Your mind was blown. You didn't even think it was real. You thought you put it in water, see if
orange hairs on a purple bud. It just looked like a space nugget. Like,
yeah. So I think that you know, it's understanding who you're catering to, what your brand is, and what your facility limitations are or capabilities are, all have to align. And if your brand doesn't align with that, you're gonna have to scratch your brand and rebrand it. And it's only gonna be brands like, you know, yourself and Canadian Dabs and Kind Selections and things like that have established like, this is the standard that I've built this brand to. And if you want to go forward with it, this is the standard that you have to go forward with it. And, you know, it's up to you, like you as a business owner and the people that you put around you to make sure that that contract between those two parties is sound and protects you, and is able to give you whatever you need out of that relationship. There'd be peace of mind that your brand's going to be represented, or, you know, a big fucking wad of cash. Or both in somewhere in between. So, I think that, I think a lot of that is going to happen, and I think it's going to give, you know, breathe a little bit of life back in. I think we need to have more culture. You know, there's more, you know, cultural gatherings for a lot of other things, and I think it's important that we continue to kind of promote every niche of our culture, and have more sessions and more gatherings and glass events pulled in with the hash events, and you know, glass art celebrations and things like that. So and
competitions, right? I mean, I like these little hash it outs and little kind of like, let's get together and just put all our gear on the table, blindfold each other, and see what we like best, and then
100%
see what's up.
There's so much ego, and I think if you have more competitions, so there's competitions all the time, then the idea of, oh, well, I won this or I won that, I think it will relax everybody, because there's so many opportunities, and I think it creates a healthier competition. I mean,
to me it's like a different kind of competition too, because like every time somebody holds a competition, you're just gonna time what you can to that competition. Like, very rarely do you have enough lead time to like completely plan out something. So, and then that run might go good or might go bad. So it's almost like a cool playoff hockey game every time, where it's like, let's say who wins this Stanley Cup, you know, but then the next competition's like a whole new Stanley Cup. It's not. So you're always going to have different people winning, and you're always going to have some cool surprises, right? And you know, I've only entered one competition ever, but and you know, didn't do that great, but you know, placed in sort of top 5, and but you know, I want to do more of it. It was such a cool experience to just like send this box off and just be like, all right, let's see, you know.
No,
So,
I think there will be more, and like I'm going to try and do some stuff up here in Canada, but it's needed, and shout out to everybody throwing anything from a garage weekend sesh to like
yeah.
get fucking organized, catered,
Or guys
dinner.
like Kyle Grow just do, mothership events with Toro involved and just wild shit, right? Where you go like, okay, well, what the fuck is next? Like, I don't know where we can go from these things. Every one seems like more incredible than the last, and but even the small ones, right? Even just a little heads up, hey, getting together here and there, and more networking, more people meeting each other, trying each other's gear. I love the trading jars things. You meet up with hash makers and just literally jar for jar.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean it's definitely evolving, um, and I'd like to, I think I want to see more people get into dabbing in general. I think these things scare the shit out of people, generally. Like, I mean, and I travel back east sometimes, and sometimes I bring the Puffco, and sometimes I bring an actual rig, and even among friends that I grew up hitting bongs with every day, when you rip out that torch and start heating a nail, they're like, whoa, 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 what's going on over here? And it's just such a scene, right? And but it's not. Once you get to in a habit of dabbing, it's my friend who I got into dabbing about a year ago. He's like, "Oh man, I love it because it's like you sit down for this little tea party. It's like this little ritual, You have all this nice glass and it's all laid out." And he's like, "I always feel like my first dab of the day is like a little tea party for myself." And I was just laughing my ass off. I'm like, "It is, man. There's a poshness and a funness and a night like you get into the custom of it, but to the outsider, it's weird and it's crazy and wild, and But I think if more people dabbled who are like serious flower heads and stuff, this whole concentrate market that we've been talking about for the last couple hours is just in its infancy. It's gonna grow, and I think we started off by like when you're flower only, you're missing like 60% of the experience potentially.
Yeah.
And imagine if you could get all these flower heads to just experience that 60% once, right?
I mean, it's not flowers phasing out, and it'll be like it's a generational thing. It's just that we don't go to the vape pen, that we don't go. And I mean, I've seen the proxy attachment to the heady rig, and I'm not into that personally.
Yeah.
Whatever floats your boat. If you're super anti-torch, that's fine. My contribution to our community is going to be I will dab any fucking where. I'll dab where you tell me I'm not allowed to dab until you kick me out. I'll dab anywhere.
That's
And
cool.
B, I will I will create media, because that's what I think needs to be done. Is all this stuff has been hidden and dabbing, you don't show it anyone, and and we have to kind of say, okay, well, this is what we look like as a concentrate community getting together and socializing. Like, I think that that's important, and I think guys like Kyle,
right? Like it was years ago I got into like wine a little bit, and I was like, getting into red wines and shit. And I went to a couple of these wine events where everyone brings a really cool bottle and you just sit around a table, and it's a lot of times it's at a restaurant, but everyone's just sitting there with a glass of wine. But our rigs are just a glass of wine, man. We're just, when you see a sesh happening and everyone's got their spot at the table and a little setup in front of them, what's different about that? It's the same social environment where you're making eye contact, you're at the table, you're shooting the shit, but you have your little device that delivers whatever pleasure we're trying to get to at that moment. So
yeah, we're gonna be live judging the final four and the top four entries for Melting of the Heads New York. So we're gonna have the entries come in early, and then they'll bring in a second. The top four will be notified, and they'll bring in an additional 4 grams, and that'll be divvied up between the judges, and that'll be done live, and it'll be head-to-head judging, like a tournament. And so you won't know live who's going head-to-head, but after, in the media that we create, we'll be able to you'll be
So
able to
like,
see.
who's over there on the East Coast? This would be East Coast hash makers, or are these
This is
mainly?
anybody who has a ticket to Melting of the Heads can come, and all you need is 8 grams to enter. It's 4 grams up front and then 4 grams at the door.
That's dope. So it won't be skewed to like East Coast hash makers or anything. It'll be
No, like I mean, Professor Q is from Maine, and he flew his stuff out on dry ice to Washington, and he took second. He took third place and fourth place in melt, and I think he took fourth place in rosin as well.
wild.
So yeah, he. I mean, yeah, it's definitely we open up the competition to anybody who wants to enter, but it's just about showing up. But my point was that I think it's about showcasing what that live tasting would look like. I mean, is what I think that's going to be, with some really talented judges. So
Well, it can be overwhelming too, man. Like, and I dab every day, all day, and but I don't dab a ton all day. I dab mostly at night. I'll have a couple dabs throughout the day. But for a lot of people, I think these events can seem a little bit overwhelming, like because people can get too high and weirded out, and and even like I've had that experience where I go to one of these events and I get a bit too excited with the dab tool, and the next thing you know, I'm kind of mute for a while instead of like networking and meeting people. But you can meter yourself and chill at them too. Like you don't have to go head to head with someone like yourself that you might be under the table well before. You know what I mean? Like you just kind of go at your own pace and make sure you're not going over the top. But I think that is a factor too for some people. But all these events are opening it up, and more people are coming out, and it's people are seeing what a fun time it can be. Yeah. And you go home with such a great adult goodie bag every time, right? It's just like every time I get home from one of these events, I'm like, oh shit, I'm loaded up.
As we like wrap up here, I wanted to ask you, as you got into hash making really heavily very quickly, was it there one resource that was more helpful than another? Did you have a mentor coming in, or how did you learn so quickly?
Well, so you were asking me about sports I do earlier, and I talked about trials and stuff, and then I've always been attracted to difficult sports. So I got into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu around age 35, and competed and trained heavily. I had a back injury a couple of years ago, so I train now, but less. But one thing I realized with Jiu-Jitsu is, as hard as something might look on the surface, anything is possible if you just slowly start chipping away at it. Like when I looked at people who could do that sport well, 7 years ago, I never dreamed I would get anywhere near there. And just if you just keep putting in the work like an athlete, just do the work, and take on as much work as you can. Like if you want to really get good at hash making quickly, do the work. And it's a fucking grind, man. It's hard physically. It's hard financially initially. You're gonna have to cough up a bunch of dough to start things off. And for me, initially I did buy a bit of time with like pros like Nicotine, and sort of make sure that I was at least on the right track initially and not making any dumb mistakes that I'd continue doing for a year before I figured it out. But then it's like getting to work on actually fucking with it and ruining material, like knowing that you're gonna fuck things up, and just taking that approach. And for me, like I love those difficult pursuits because I love the perfecting things and getting better at things is so satisfying. But with hash making, there's an extra element of like you're digging for gold too. Like when you're it's like panning for gold. I describe it, especially when you're running new material, because you're like, every time you pull those screens up, it's like, let's see what's in here. What did I get? Did I get a pile of gold or a bunch of shit? And so yeah. So I don't know. I think anyone can get good at things. Obviously, people will do it at different rates, but the main thing is just doing it a shit ton, like just putting in the work and grinding. So I think, yeah. Sorry. Sorry, I know you were muting there to have the dab, but yeah, I would say, combination and also keeping an open mind, I think is really important, because initially I created decisions in my head about how things worked, or like salts are just fine and organics no better and this is all just this, and you get these kind of hard-headed leans. I do anyway. But now that I like, as I get older, and just I always consciously try to challenge my own thinking and give things I've decided on another chance, and just keep an open mind and try shit. And a lot of what I know today is because I was open minded about certain things that initially I was closed off to. I was like, I kind of decided, no, I already know what that's going to do and it's not worth it, so I'm not going to do it. Then I try it. Oh shit, it works. Okay, now I do it forever. So yeah.
Duff, man, I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you taking the time. Like, where can people get in touch with you, and if they want to reach out?
Insta is the best place for sure. Wash.oil on Insta, and Duffs_dank_farm on Insta are the two accounts that I run. And hit me in the DMs, obviously, just to say hi and to ask for a way to speak more privately. So but yeah, and happy to answer questions for people. Like, I do like giving people tips and advice. I'm not going to give all my secrets out or anything, but I don't have kind of that famine mentality. I like sharing a bit of information. I like helping people out who are fucking up and starting out. A lot of people did that for me. So, if anyone wants to ever reach out and has questions or anything, happy to be there.
So, well, thanks again, Duff, for taking the time. I definitely want to have you back, and I'm definitely going to be watching out for any rumblings of hearing about the brand coming to market, because I know it's definitely got a place here, and I definitely want to see it.
Cheers. It was an honor to get the invite to come on, and just really appreciate it. And I think we had an awesome chat. It was cool to reconnect, and yeah, man, we'll be in touch, and thanks again.
Absolutely, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Cheers, everyone.